could also move
All
over
right.
there.
It is Wednesday, December 4th. I call this meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. And we'll start with roll call, starting on the far end there.
Tony Stein.
Jeannie Nyer.
Michael Hall.
Jerry Fleming.
Dave Bench. All right. And then we'll move right on to public comments. Is there anyone who has signed up to speak? We have one person. All right. Thank you very much. If you would, step to the microphone and state your name.
Okay. Hi, I'm Catherine Horn. I live at 5011 Timberline Drive. I've sent everyone an email recently, or multiple emails, regarding drilling that is going on the lot next door to me that is under construction. And we became aware, I was not aware that you were allowed to excavate within the side setback lines. And so they have excavated right up to our property line for their storm water retention system. Setbacks are here for a reason, and I think this needs to be reviewed by the city, and especially P&Z. It was not caught by our city engineer in the approval process that they were in the backyard water easement, or in the utility easement. So they drilled into the utility easement, which is a 10-foot easement, and so they're 5 feet from the fence line on that one. The stormwater retention pond is right next to my property line. My entire house has been vibrating. My neighbors' homes have been vibrating during this process. We have spoken to an engineer, a structural engineer, who said that does, cause damage to your foundations because, our foundations settle, but they're hitting the bedrock, and it's hitting hard. Like, you stand in my home, you feel the vibration on your feet, you see my chandelier moving, you put your hands on the counter, you feel the vibration. This won't impact my house, but it needs to impact future homes. We have been talking about property rights and people's ability to build. We have very generous lots, and our side setbacks can allow you a really nice buildable area. And I think we really need to look at making sure within these setbacks, you're not drilling down up to a property line. There's a reason you have a setback. You're putting a large tank in there and then some fill. That's not structurally sound. I can go put one right there on my side of the property line, and then you have very thin layer of rock, and you've changed the bedrock. You've changed the structural integrity of it. So I ask that the city and P&Z look at it. I ask that you look at possibly adding a drilling permit, so that it is staked out before they drill for trees, before they drill for the stormwater retention, and before they drill for the pool or any drilling, so that this error could have been caught before it was put into the easement in the back. I think that easement needs to be recognized within our code. That is our water line along Timberline. So we now have large oak trees that are going in there because the city of Austin said, sure, put them in there. And the builder says, yeah, great, let's put those in there, because in a few years, we won't own this property. By the time the limbs are a problem, it will be someone else's problem. But it's the underground water lines that they're going to reach as well. So Rollingwood needs to approve that as well. We need to take ownership of that, because those are our water lines. And our infrastructure, as we all know, costs a lot to maintain and a lot to fix. So I asked P&Z to take a look at this. It was changed 4 years ago, and there was no discussion, there was no follow-up, and it's time. So we have enough lots that are being drilled to death and neighbors being impacted negatively. It's not just the builder's rights, it's all property rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Could I ask you a question? You had mentioned City of Austin once or twice in your thing. Why do you bring them up?
Well, City of Austin Energy. So the energy company along the property line, so what the builder does is they say, hey, we want to put these trees here because it's supposed to be 10 feet. They're not supposed to be able to put them within 10 feet of the power lines. There's only certain types of trees like crepe myrtles, trees that don't grow so big. And oaks are not listed on that. Those are supposed to be forbidden. Well, you can go and ask And City of Austin says, sure, or the utility company says, sure, you can plant them there, but we reserve the right to cut the limbs or trim the trees if necessary. And a builder who's putting in large oak trees knows that those limbs aren't gonna hit the power lines or the power pole just yet. It'll take several years. They will no longer own that property. It will be passed on to whoever has purchased it. Then they will be dealing with it, or will be dealing with it, when a limb falls over in a storm, or is frozen in a storm and falls, and we suddenly don't have electricity. So, and if City of Austin give that permission, Rollingwood with our underground water lines right there, we need to have some sort of say in, well, hey, hold on, wait a second, because when they jackhammered those holes for those trees in the back, you could see our water lines. You cannot tell me that doesn't negatively impact it. I've lived on Timberline for 19 years. We've had sediment issues come through our line when there's been building issues. It's just, you know, 5 feet doesn't sound like a lot, 10 feet doesn't sound like a lot, but it really is. And truly, 2 days ago, the next door neighbor's house backed up with sewage because they had tree roots in the sewer line. And it was just large oak trees and really large crepe myrtles that had grown over 20, 25 years. So it does happen. But,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
All right, you know that we can't act on this.
No, I know. I just would like you to
Okay.
look at doing this in the future. I've sent photos. It's a problem, and it's going to continue to be one.
If,
Are we allowed to talk about it even?
I,
So-
well,
That's the question.
We're-
Under public comment, you're not supposed
Yeah.
to discuss.
okay. We can put it on the agenda for next time, and it might be useful for you to make that same presentation to city council the
Yes,
next
no,
meeting.
I'm going to the committee meeting and council meeting.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. It was well done. Moving along to the consent agenda. I trust everyone's had an opportunity to go through and look at the meeting minutes. Do we have a motion on it?
I move that we accept the minutes.
I'll second it.
All right, motion and second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Ayes carried. Moving on to the regular agenda. Agenda item number 3, discussion regarding intent to continue and to serve on the Planning and Zoning Commission. Ashley, do you have something you want to do with this, or?
So we sent out an email to everybody on the P&Z whose term was ending. From the attachment in the packet, you can see that just about half of the board is their term is expiring this time. I believe we got responses from everybody that they were interested in continuing to serve. So this is kind of just a formality, letting you all know the process. It will then go to the city council next month, and they will consider reappointment of anybody whose term is up at this point. So
Okay.
that's really all we have to say. No action or anything needed.
Okay. Thank you all for your service. All right. Moving along to regular agenda item number 4. Discussion and next steps on consultant review and assessment of segmenting and parallel plane height measurement approaches. And this is a continuation of the discussion that we had last P&Z meeting. I went back and listened to the entire thing again today. It was a good discussion. Where we ended up with was we wanted to bring this up to City Council, see whether or not there was support for our going forward in hiring a consultant to have a look at a couple of different approaches, including segmenting and parallel plane. And then, and if we felt that we had gotten that support, then we would go out and look for someone. And so that was discussed in the last city council meeting. I think we got tepid support for it. I think it's there. There is the request that we go out and find someone and then come back with what the cost might be, some sort of a bid or expectation. with that in mind, once that happened, I went and Mike and I tried to get together, but with Thanksgiving and holidays and vacations and everything that went along with it, it really wasn't possible for us to get together. So I took it upon myself to write a proposal that might be used by a consultant to at least assess how much work there might be done. Mike got back from vacation, had a look at it. I don't think we cared for it too much. So where we left it is, you have that as of today. You know, I'd asked Michaela to share this with you. We actually wrote it a week and a half or so ago, but I just wanted to have some kind of a document to talk from, and to at least give you some idea of what my expectation is if we're going to go to a consultant. What kinds of things do we need to let that consultant know before we can expect to get some kind of a reasonable bid or price or whatever it is? You know, so effectively it's essentially like defining what the problem is, what the scope of the problem is, and what kind of answers we're looking for in regard to that problem. You know, you don't have to use what I had given you, but I think what Mike and I settled on is that tonight we ought to at least come up with some list of things that we would expect a consultant to do. What is it that we expect them to do, so that we can talk to somebody, get a price, and then go back to city council and say, will you pay for this? Will we get an appropriation? Does this all make sense? Okay,
It does.
all right. So, with that in mind, you know, as I say, I probably spent more time on this than I wanted to. But my feeling is that given there's a certain kind of topography that we have here in Rolling Wood, and maybe a fictional topography would be just as good as using somebody's house to do it. Maybe that's not a good idea, I don't know. But, you know, if we just kind of created some topography and said, okay, here, consultant, look at this topography, see whether or not tenting will work on this area as well as it does in this area. And if we flip the house around in different places on the lot, what does it do? Can that work? It's just a thought. I think that Mike was more intent on actually using actual lots, and which is fine. And then trying something with that, but again, trying what, I don't know. So I'm just going to open the floor up to discussion here on this, and hopefully we can come back with a few ideas as to what it is we're looking for, so that we can write a decent proposal that we all agree is what it is we want, and go forward with it. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
Who wants to go first?
I enjoyed your effort, and it was helpful to me to see it written down and with the diagrams that you put in there. I guess my question is, why does Mike Rhodes not like it?
I mean, I don't know that it was that I don't like it necessarily. I was trying to respect your motion that we approved, mainly,
Right.
which I thought was pretty simple. I thought it was, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I didn't go back and watch the meeting, but I think the motion was something along the lines of, let's take plan A, let's take plan B, let's find test cases, and let's have somebody show us what plan A and plan B look like on these test cases. And so that was what I thought you motioned, and I thought that was very sage and wise and sounded great. And so, when I got this narrative from Dave, I think the only thing that, like I said, it's not that I don't like it per se. I think that we need real world surveys for a lot of the reasons that we've discussed in here, particularly with respect to some of what I perceive to be the challenges of parallel plane with existing structures and walls and you know, what's natural grade versus existing grade, because most of these lots have had a house on them. And then I just thought that the narrative piece was perhaps unnecessary. I mean, I thought the way you phrased it was, you know, like I felt like we should take we have the ordinance that CRCRC produced that several of us voted for, and we're ready to approve. So it's like, well, we have that, right? Someone already did that work. That was a plan that some people liked. We have this alternate plan that I think is descriptive enough for an architect to analyze from or to put into place. So let's just take those two things, as simple as they are, hand them 4 surveys, and say, would you please draw the buildable area that results from Plan A and Plan B? And I thought that's what we left last meeting with. And so this felt like background about the why, and I think, you know, David, you know, it felt like, just feels to me like we're I don't know that, I mean, maybe I'm wrong and I'm willing to be told otherwise, but I didn't feel like we were trying to ask them to help us solve a problem. I felt like we were asking them to help us analyze our ideas to solve the problem. And so to me, that was the distinction.
And so you'd be giving them the CRCRC proposal, you know, as that's written, and then kind of your diagrams and notes from the last packet, basically.
That's what I thought. I mean, that's what I thought we approved.
Well,
You know, in a
reading
nutshell.
this, I was like, you know, gosh, we're trying to move as quickly as we can, and I'd hate to spend, you know, time iterating on something like this. I wondered if we had 2 plans as they were, and if there could be, you know, a meeting with an architect with, you know, you 2 or all of us, or whatever, and just say, here's the 2 things, let's tackle it, you know, send them to you in advance, take a look, let's tackle the questions, we'll describe the scope of what we're looking for, you know, in an hour meeting, you tell us how much you think that might cost, how much time you might have to take to do that, and have kind of 2 of the representatives of, I guess, the authors of the 2 different proposals to be able to explain, you know, to the provider kind of what we were looking for in both scenarios. That's kind of what I thought, with the focus being obviously tenting more than height, and I think that was a distinction. I'd seen Councilwoman Brown's letter from the last meeting, and just making sure that we have them focused on tenting. I think what Mike's been saying the whole time is, you know, we figure out the tenting, then hopefully you know, if not solves itself, the height, it creates the visual of, if we went in that direction, now what do we need to do with height? Is it parallel plane? Is it something similar to what the city of Austin does, or whatever? That was kind of my perspective.
You use the word scope, and I don't know that what, you know, Mike's document, alternate proposal for tenting and building height. I don't know that it gets into what the scope is. You know, if we can just, even if we just define that, I think I'd at least be ready to go to the next step. But I don't, but to take the document, the codified version of what the parallel plane is, and then this alternate proposal, and hand it to an architect and say, okay, what will it cost to do what? What are we asking them to do? Look at and put a tent on the, what does it mean? What, all I want to do is come out with something that is concrete, that can be communicated, that we all agree is what it is we're after, so that whenever an answer or set of answers comes back, we're not all sitting around here individually scratching our heads saying, well, that's not what I thought it was. I thought we were doing this.
Well, I think we're just asking them to give us a graphical representation
Yeah.
of
Right.
what results,
I
you
think,
know,
yeah,
and I think that's it. That's
yeah.
There's nothing more. It's that
With
simple.
identical topographical map, you get floor plans, building elevations, roof lines,
No.
and floor
No, I think you're just getting a volume that you can build in, just like on
Well,
the,
that's what I'm saying. You get a site plan, and you give them a criteria of maybe square foot per building.
no,
Yeah, and you just say, now put a building in here and see what parallel plane gives you, and then do the same criteria, square foot, over here with segments, and see what it looks like.
Well, I was picturing, I mean, and
that's not.
what Mike gave us in the last meeting
Well, that's,
has a graphical tent.
Right.
They have a house in there, whether you need that or not, but there's a graphical tent that's there, and I would envision that they would give us a similar graphical tent based on the parallel plane
Okay.
with the tenting, and you show us, this is, with this proposal on this lot,
Okay.
this is the tent you could build within. Same lot, this proposal, here's what the tent looks like, and I think part of the reason the concern is, you know, as you get on a parallel plane on a sloping lot, you know, I think everybody can at least conceptually wrap your head around what the
Yeah.
top is.
Yeah.
But then, you know, that inherently slopes effectively to the edges based on this tent, and I think that's the part that we've all had a challenge of really visualizing what does that allow? Does it allow for 2 stories if the property line and therefore the edge of your tent is sloping in a certain way? How much, you know, kind of, you know, what you'd call it, I always picture the fence going down a slope, you know, how much stepping do you have to do? I mean, you know, I think that's what I was picturing. Can they just draw us a tent?
See,
Right.
you,
But I
and
think-
you said a lot of things there, okay? And tent, it starts with tent, good, got a volume, all right? Now, what of that volume? And then you start talking about, well, we have, will it support 2 stories? Will it require us to step up? These are the things, these are the specifics that I think that we need to hash out early, so that otherwise, how can you do a comparison? What do you know? I mean, you know, you got 2 pictures here of a thing, and you're looking at it, okay, well, what's the difference between those pictures? What are the constraints from this one versus the constraints from this one? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the picture will show that, and I mean, I'm sure we could ask them to, you know,
yeah.
put a
And the-
pretend house in there, you know, on both of them too.
Right, and the tent, in a way, is the maximum building.
Right.
But, and then the trick is getting the levels in there.
And I think
Which
part of
is
it was,
nothing
I
but a floor.
guess I'd hate to spend a bunch of time and, you know, hopefully not multiple meetings hashing out what is the scope, and then, you know, and then meet with them the first time and they say, well, here's other basic questions. I was kind of, can we get quickly to a meeting with a provider with what we have? And maybe they'll say, you know, I need more specifics, I need more scope, I need something in writing. Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll say, oh yeah, I got it. That makes sense, you know, and presumably they'll take notes based on the conversation. That was what I envisioned.
Well, we can give them lot size, and we can get,
I would hope you give them, you know, give them surveys, yeah.
Okay. Well, I think Mike said that he had identified some lots that might be useful. I pushed back on lots in that, you know, we would have to get permission to use them, and I think you've done some work now to get permission from.
Yeah, I think we're not gonna have a problem getting permission. I mean, we may not get like the absolute perfect test cases, but I think I've got at least,
Okay.
I need to look through a bunch of emails, but I think there's at least like 6, you know, and I'm sure we can, if they're not, you know, I mean, I think we've talked about the different, sort of the different,
Okay.
you know, arrangements we'd like to have, but I think they're pretty close. I
All
think-
right.
So, I guess, I can hear all of what y'all are saying. And as a former consultant, I do appreciate the specificity of the request. So I do think that the architects would appreciate some guidance. Is one of the questions that we have, what is the maximum volume of home we can build with each scenario, under each scenario? What are the I mean, aside from just drawing a diagram, don't we have some specific questions we want to ask them to ascertain when comparing these two different proposals? I mean, is the question essentially which one will give you the most flexibility, which one is the most, provides the most volume for the home? I mean, what else are we asking?
I didn't think we were asking for opinions. I thought we were asking for
Drawing.
drawings.
Okay.
So if we want to go out and seek an opinion, I think that's a different motion, at least to me, than what you made. So, you
Okay,
know,
no,
I
I'm
thought
just-
we were providing the opinions. We just needed help with
The visualization.
visualizing
Visualization.
what these, what these two different concepts create.
Okay.
Yeah, I was hoping to get a visualization of what is the tent that you can build within.
That's a
Right.
good way to put it.
Okay.
So is it essentially, what is the maximum home you can build with, under each scenario? Maximum size?
Well, I think
No,
we're gonna
it's
get
just
a
a
volume.
tent, yeah.
We're gonna get like this is the area on the lot that a structure can sit, and I think, you know, once we get that might beget some other questions that we might need to ask. I think one of the things that, you know, Dave and I had, I think, a great conversation around more agreement than not, I would say, and so these are, you know, maybe frustrating in this environment, but like, you know, one of the things that we talked about was, and that I think we shared sort of a common belief in, is that, you know, most people in Rollingwood, I think, have the expectation that if they are building to their side setback, that they should be able to build 2 stories, 2 reasonable stories at the side setback. And I've never heard anyone say otherwise. And I think that's one part of what we'd like to team out of these visuals is, does CRC proposal allow that? Does the other proposal allow that? Or, you know, or not, or do both, or whatever.
So that's a good question.
That is a great question, but I don't know that we need to, I don't know that we need to ask that. I think we're going to be able to see that pretty easily. Like I think we've all been around and know what we're looking. We you know, this is not a super hard, you know, thing to look at and go, well, at the property, right at the building line, you've got, oh, this one gives you not enough area.
For a
This
2-story
one
home.
gives- right.
So the parameter is a 2-story home.
I think that is one thing that we talked about with respect to tinting that we agreed on. Just, you know, like, it was like, hey, I think this is part of what I hear. That's a lot of the complaint I've heard around the parallel plane proposal that I think frankly is going to be borne out as true once we draw it, is that it's going to be very hard to build a 2-story home on a setback line because it's just going to get shaved off as you go up or down. And so maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, I don't, you know, but like, I think that we're trying to get some real quality, you know, visual, graphical, whatever you want to call it, representation, so that we can look at it and say, you know, does this work? Is it, you know, and does it feel right? I mean, I think we're all trying to get to the point where we're, you know, limiting what's happening at those setbacks in at least in a reasonable way.
Well, one of the things I built into this proposal was to try a couple of different things with the segmenting approach, using different means of being able to establish the datum. You know, the way your proposal, you know, is initially written is that, you know, you take the high point for each segment, and then that establishes what the datum is going to be. And frankly, I don't think that'll work very well for what the CRCRC intended to do. But an average or a low point might, and so I would like to see a tent drawn not just one way, but several ways, based on a change of datum. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Well, sure, it does, but that's not what I said. I actually said, I don't know where we would take the datum for maximum height from.
Okay, well, we
and
gotta
I was
tell
not-
them
And I
that.
wasn't committed to that at
Okay,
all.
then
So-
to some extent, you're making my point. We gotta tell them that. What is it? What are we asking them to do? I mean, if they're gonna put a tent on there, they gotta start somewhere.
Well, we talked about this last time.
Okay.
And what I said is that I think that once you draw the tent, I think that where you take the datum and how you do maximum height is going to be a lot less material. And so I think, you know, I don't care if we start off drawing the tent to infinity and it's a peak of 50 feet. We all know that we're not ending up there, but I think we can at least see what comes out of it. Having at least for the segmenting approach, figuring out where to slice off the tent at the top based on where we measure 35 feet from or 32 feet based on, you know, a flat roof, is a very easy thing to do. We probably do that in this room. You know, that is a simple step. So, I mean, if that's an important part to you, then let's just start with the average. I mean, I think that's the easiest, simple, you know, let's just tell them to give us a 35 feet from the average of the segment and start there. I think that's fine.
All right, let's take a few notes. All right? So, step one, identify some properties, maybe? Let's just,
Yeah,
let's,
I think that's fine.
okay, all right, okay. Okay. Now, and let's presume we have permission to use them.
Of course.
We'll identify and get permission, right? Okay, all right. Now we have, how many? How many are we gonna do?
I thought what we said we would try to get is sloping up from the street, down from the street,
Okay,
significant right to left, left to right, doesn't matter. And then
Okay.
a sort of a diagonally
good,
sloping. And I
okay,
think that covers most of it.
okay, and then, okay, so upslope, downslope, and side to side.
And diagonal.
And, okay, yeah, good, all right.
Before,
And diagonal, okay.
We can
One
do
side.
flat.
Do we,
I mean,
do,
flat's pretty
Flat's
easy.
probably
we
easier,
can,
but-
we can do flat
yeah.
ourselves. Probably.
huh? What?
We can probably
Flat.
draw flat ourselves, but sure.
Flat? Yeah, put a flat one in there,
We
why
can do
not?
Flat. That'll
There you go.
be the easiest one.
Okay, you can have my building plan, you can have my, okay, very good, okay, all right, yeah, why not? Call it the control.
Okay.
Right? Okay, all right, so we have that, we have 5 lots, we have permission, now, identify, now we talk to some architects or what? What's next?
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
yeah, I would think you would have a preliminary conversation with an architect or two.
Preliminary, okay,
To see, to explain, you know, generally
uh-huh,
what we want to accomplish.
uh-huh,
I would think then there'd be a follow-up with the surveys.
okay, okay, and let's see. So we have the preliminary discussion, and what we're asking for is nothing but a graphical representation of these 2 ideals on these 5 lots. Is that right?
10, right.
Graphical, that's what, okay. Some sort of a, okay. Okay. On all 5, okay. And we think we'll be able to get them to give us a price based on that. Is that enough?
I think so.
That's enough,
I
okay?
think maybe with one change to each
Okay.
idea.
Okay,
Happy to take your suggestion that we use the average of the high and low point on a segment for datum.
okay,
So we have, can I stop you there on the tinting for the sides? We had from the last meeting, you had higher point A or point B, which is one side of the lot. higher of point C or D, which is the other side of the lot.
So I think the data.
And
was
that,
the-
and
I
then you
think the
run a
data-
line from there. So
I would think the data would be the average of the high and low on ABC.
but now we're shifting to height. So for
for
height,
height,
for
yeah.
height, you're taking the average of A, B, C, D.
or the average.
So the center
average
point,
of the high and the
effectively,
low.
you're saying center point, which I'm okay with. I
Or it
mean,
may
if
not
that's
be
what you mean.
center point because it's the average of them. So I don't know if you had a really.
Well, if you take a
yeah.
cross through, two things, you do the diagonal on that, you end up with.
Well, I think you take the average of the four, and that's an elevation number, right?
Yeah,
a
that's
number.
what I mean.
Yeah,
That,
okay.
if you did that, I think geometrically, I think you end up with the average, that's what it is. Where
so-
those two diagonals cross, I believe you're gonna get the
Oh,
average.
I see what you mean. If
Yeah.
you're drawing them 3D, yeah,
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
that would.
yeah, I believe, I think,
I think, yeah.
I think that's right.
But taking the 4 points and doing the average, and you say,
Yeah.
okay,
If it's
and, then,
not
and then
pretty-
you get a flat plane there. And,
As long as we say it,
yeah.
this is what we did, and we use that, okay, it's good. Then we all understand what we did, whether it's the average or not, this is what we did.
Yeah, I'm just picturing,
Yeah.
with these 4 points, if that's 100, that's 95, that's 90, you add them together and divide by 4.
Well, yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Same thing. Yeah, geometrically, or arithmetically, it doesn't matter. Okay, all right. So so we're going to take the average for each segment, average elevation.
And I would assume that the architects can do these in 3D, so you go back, and it's a living file, you go back and say, let's, we can look at it, we go back and say, let's try it with the average, the high and low, or
Right.
whatever. We
I
could
would
iterate
think
if we wanted to pretty easily.
And then I would say, Dave,
Yeah.
I think there was some discussion on on moving. I think this I was looking for. I think the CRCRC ordinance had tenting starting at a 10-foot line from the property line.
That's right, yeah.
So, just asking, but do you want to keep that, or do you want to take it over to the property line and start at 15 feet, given our past conversations around grade at property lines maybe being more reliable and natural versus something that's 10 feet in?
Oh,
Because if there was a house there already, and if it was to the setback, then you've got
Then you
wall
gotta- then you gotta
foundation
try to
and
figure
whatever.
out,
So,
yeah.
so it's getting to the same height at the 10 foot. It's just starting at a different place, is my understanding.
Well, it's not getting to the same height necessarily, depending on
Well,
what the grade is.
it's
but-
the same math height, but it's not. Yeah, it'll be a little different.
I think whatever we do, we need to put the same constraints on it. Seems to me. I mean, if you're going to make a comparison between these two approaches, and we're going to say, well, we're going to establish tenting based on these criteria, whatever it is, we ought to do it the same way, I think. Otherwise, it's an apples and oranges kind of comparison. Because to me, when you do it right to the property line, what you're doing is introducing at least 10 feet of uncertainty horizontally, because that can't be built on. It's not a buildable area, but it figures into the calculation, which doesn't make sense to me. You know what I'm saying? That 10 feet on either side, absolutely 10 feet cannot be used to be built on the sides. If there's extreme sloping going on, say you're in a bowl, and you have extreme sloping, so you have a high point now at a property line where you're starting higher than maybe you would have if you had come off 10 feet from the property line. What I'm saying is there's a possibility of 10 feet of relief, I guess, at the edge. That's what it would probably be.
It
Yeah.
either works for you or against you, depending on what the slope is doing.
Yeah,
but
right.
I think the
Right,
conversation. I think most of. I think what. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, the intent, right, is to capture what the natural grade was, or a better way of determining what it is, because it's not gonna be something that's built on, so it wouldn't have been adjusted in that way.
I think normally that's true. More true at a property line than 10 feet in, which is
Yeah.
what I think Alex had mentioned, when, you know, when we had her here, and most, and I haven't studied all these city ordinances, but most of the ones I see start at property lines.
Okay,
Just as a,
Well, then, I guess what I would say is that for the purposes of demonstration, assuming that what you say is right, that there's hardly any difference between a 10-foot at the property line and 25-foot at 10 feet in, right? That's kind of what you're saying.
15 feet. Well, on a flat lot, it's exactly the same, right? I mean, if it's a flat lot, 15
Yeah.
feet at the property line
That's right.
versus
That's right. That's our control case. That's our control case, right? Yeah, that's always a true fact. But if we said that, the way the CRC designed it was to come in 10 feet. But for the purposes of comparison, I think we have to establish it to be the same. And I give it to you. I say, okay, yeah, we'll take it from the property line.
Well, I
But
think
they
that's
both
gonna
have to
be-
be-
Both comments
They have to.
resonate to me.
Well,
yeah.
I think, to me, that's gonna be misleading, and you might as well just stick to the 10-foot end. That's gonna be as easy as getting onto the property line and be more realistic. So it's,
and you're not evaluating the CRC or, excuse me,
Brooke Brown, if you use something other than the height reference that's in the CRCRC proposal for the CRCRC drawing, you're not representing what that proposal's going to do. So I think, you know, I think what the council will want to see is, what does this proposal do? What does this proposal do? And if you want to change the parameters for purposes of the segment proposal, you know, that is a decision y'all make. But I think the council's going to want to know, what does this do with respect to the proposal that's being presented?
Yeah, yeah. Well,
And
I think the one thing I was wondering on that point.
if I might ask you, I know several of y'all saw the memo I wrote when this was at the council. I have a pretty serious concern about the segment approach with respect. It seems very rigid if you assume that for every lot in Rollingwood, there's a reasonable, that the 40-40-20 segment size is reasonable. And the more I look around the lots in this community, I think that is going to be the failure of the segment plan for Rollingwood, because you have the natural breaks in the terrain on lots occurring at a wide variety of distances from the curb. And so it seems to me that if the concept is that with the segment approach that we want a minimum size first floor as viewed from the curb, then I think you would need to say something like that versus 40 feet from the curb, because that 40 feet might be workable and it might be totally inappropriate. And that's it seems to me, if you're trying, you know, the segment approach doesn't seem to me, it seems just a pretty rigid kind of approach, given the very significant changes in topography we have among the lots in this community. It's, and they're not just, I would say, my assessment is more than 30% of the lots have more than a 10-foot change in elevation. Just if you think about all the lots that back up to a dry creek, all the lots that back up to are on a hillside already, all the lots that are on a downslope of a hill, there's so many of the lots have lots of variation, and that's the concern I have. If you have a plan that's a rigid 40-40-20, is that really going to fit well for the lots we have here? And I just raise that. I'm just trying to be straightforward with how I see it at this point. So thank you.
okay. I agree with Brooke in terms of and actually Dave. I think that both, for comparison purposes, the setbacks to 10 feet should be the same, even though I understand why going to the property line would be, could be advantageous. However, it's not written like that in the CRC's recommendation. Now, if we were to change the RC's recommendation to go all the way to the property line, that's fine. At least you're comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges. But it's not good to have two different criteria for comparison purposes, I don't think.
I only really brought it up because I think it was discussed here by a CRCRC member and at your CRCRC meeting, I think. But if you want to keep it the way it is, I don't really care. I was just bringing it up because I thought that there was momentum to move to that, but it doesn't bother me.
You know,
Yeah, I remember Alex speaking to
here-
that in our meeting. But,
there have been a lot of meetings and a lot of discussion about this stuff. And getting things a little bit mixed up along the way as to who said what or how this went. I'm doing it all the time. But the idea of coming, I can say this, the idea of coming from the property line was never part of a CRCRC meeting.
Well, let's just keep
Yeah,
it the way it is.
but it was, I think, in the meeting that you had with Duke and Alex, I think that they may have suggested it at that time, which is not a CRCRC recommendation. It was just a thought that they were doing. That was offline.
she mentioned it in one of our meetings too. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Alex mentioned it in one of our meetings too. It came up. Yeah.
That
Well, I don't
would
think it
not be
matters, as long
that
as
does
they're
not
both
make
the
it a
same.
CRC.
No,
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
saying it does.
Yeah, okay, yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of things that are said outside the meeting that don't count. So, we have the recommendation the way that it sits today, and everybody in the CRC voted for it. And it would matter to me that they are the same, that whatever we use as our starting points be the same. And I think I was ready to give it to you, but the more I think about it, the less I don't think I don't want to do that. I think I would like to start with the CRCRC recommendation that we start at a 10-foot point from the property line, and at that point you are allowed 25 feet. That's where the break point is. Can we do that? Okay. Everybody in the audience happy with that? Very good.
Setbacks. You know my opinion on the setbacks.
All right. So starting at 25 feet at the 10-foot property line, that would be our tent, right?
For the CRCRC recommendation,
Yes.
we're gonna keep the other proposal the way it was and the CRC proposal the way it is.
Oh, no, we won't do that. No, that's my point. No, what we want to make sure that whatever way is being, the comparisons have to start in the same point.
Why is that? If they're two different proposals, they don't have to be the same. I mean, they're different in many ways.
Yeah, but at least start off in the same spot. I mean,
Yeah, no,
I mean, what's-
yeah.
I mean, I don't.
Well,
Yeah,
I
there's-
think I'm okay with that. Like,
Yeah.
I don't. I
Because you're
think
introducing.
part of the reason for the property line, really the only reason for going to the property line is sanctity of natural grade, and so fine. I mean, I guess we're gonna hand real surveys to a real architect, and if they come back and say, hey guys, there's a driveway clearly that is not at natural grade here, 10 feet in from the property line. Not sure what point to use. Can you give me more guidance? Well, maybe that'll mean that we need to come back and refine what we're asking for, or whatever, but I mean, I think, like I said, if it's a flat lot, you end up at the same place.
The driveway is a good example. I think there are probably driveways that are right along the 10-foot setback that might be like above grade
Or below.
or below. And so how do you treat that, right? It's a good question. I think that's why I thought I remember the meeting you're talking about. and that's why I thought we had talked about a property line analysis, just to, cause it's really hard to mess with the property line, like the grade at property line. So it's gonna be the closest approximation to natural. So I don't know, how do you address like that driveway along the 10-foot setback line?
Well, could we ask that, the architects give us an opinion with respect to the two proposed, ordinances, that, their opinion would be that going to the property line as opposed to 10 feet in will end up with such and such and such of an effect.
That's a good idea, Jeannie. I mean, if we're already involving an expert on the subject,
Right, why not
why not
ask
pose
them?
that question
I
to
think
them?
you're
And
right.
they handle surveys all the time, so
Yeah.
they may be better suited to
Yeah,
decide
let them,
that.
just
But-
ask them the question and.
Yeah, we could do that, and
It's a good idea.
I think any questions we ask the architect or the consultant is a good idea. But what my concern is that when you decide you're gonna start from a different point, then you're adding a new variable into the equation that wouldn't otherwise exist if you started from the same point. If you start from two different points, there's a variable in there that we're taking into account and saying, well, this is working better this way on this lot. On another lot, it may not work as well.
Well, I suspect that once I don't know exactly how it works, but an architect, inputs the survey into their model that's gonna then generate the 3D, and
Yeah.
I've been in there with them and they're, moving points around in their CAD file or whatever. I mean, it seems like it would be relatively easy for them to look at it both ways too. I would imagine.
Yeah,
That's what I
I think the additional
Okay.
data crunch on that's pretty minimal, because once everything's input, then it's just like now adjust
I've
5.
seen, you
adjust
asked
10.
about the room,
No
they just
doubt.
move the wall of the room over here.
No
and
doubt.
move it,
Yeah. Fair enough. If you'll allow me that, then I'm okay. That we can at least make the comparison between what it would look like at the property line versus 10 feet in.
Because that might lead to some questions about the CRCRC proposal too, because I'm picturing some lots where you might have, there was some excavation done, like where the property line has a
Sure.
retaining wall and
Right.
the driveway may sit
Mm-hmm.
down below.
Yep.
How are we gonna handle that in either scenario?
Well, and the fact is, since we have the person on the line, if it turned out that even the CRCRC proposal worked better from the property line,
Right.
well, you'd probably
They
want to
can,
know
they
that
can look at it
anyway.
both ways.
That's
You'd probably want to know it anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so.
I think the main thing is once they get
Okay.
it in, I think
Good
it'll
idea.
be pretty
Okay.
quick to
So,
iterate.
so the decision was made now, we're gonna do it from both the property line and from the 10-foot setback line, or
Both
the required
proposals.
yard.
Both proposals.
I wouldn't think that would be that impactful to time or cost, but we'll
Okay.
see what they say.
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right, so here we are, so we're gonna create the tent, 5 lots, using the tent from both the 10-foot property, from the property line and 10-foot setback. What else do we need? Do we want to talk about 2 stories? Do we ask them, or do we leave that discussion for later? That discussion
I
comes
think it would be
after
draw
they-
the tent, and then we're kind of asking,
draw the
hey, can you
tent.
fit 2 stories?
Can you
of-
do
yeah,
it?
can-
Okay,
could you
okay.
fit-
And
And maybe that leads them to drawing a fictitious
Yeah, I think-
house in there. or
All
something
right.
like that.
I think that's
Okay.
the trick, is getting 2 stories in.
Can you get 2 stories? Okay, so, but we don't ask that, that's not part of the initial
Or
proposal.
I think we talk about it. That's something we're gonna, wanna look
We're
at,
looking
yeah.
for 2 stories.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, the ideal case would be
Yeah.
at least 2 stories.
Yeah, do either of these fundamentally create a
Is that
challenge
right?
with doing that? Yeah.
We good with that? Right? All right, okay.
Well, are we? I'm sorry, but, I mean, at one point in some of the meetings, we've talked about split levels and you know, there are some beautiful homes that are not two-story, but, well, they might be two-story in one part, but not two-story in the whole structure, so, I think it would be better just to say, what is the maximum home you can build given these parameters? And let them decide, and let them show us what can be built, the maximum height that can be built, the, you know.
Or what's the maximum tent you can build within?
Right, exactly. Show us.
Yeah, then we could just look at it
Okay,
and see it.
Yeah.
okay, give me that question. What is the maximum what? Okay,
Tent.
yeah.
Tent.
The maximum tent. Is
This
that
is
like a
drawing of
volume?
the tent.
Is it a volume?
Yes, that's
Is that
that.
It's a
It's that
volume.
shaded
I'm
area.
thinking
It's a volume, okay. Is it,
I'm thinking
yeah.
volume.
Is that, yeah, okay.
Well, the max, I mean,
Okay.
given,
All
Are
right.
we in like a Euclidean geometry space right now? What are we talking
Okay, oh,
what'd you say?
about? Volumes.
all right.
Well,
It's getting
No,
complicated. for me.
we talked about this, last week or last month. Feels like it was a week ago. About, there's 40 feet, the segments are 40 feet right now, the way that they've defined them on that graphic that you've got. And we say, well, why is that? Well, it's arbitrary, we think. I'm gonna tell you, that volume will change if you change that 40 feet. If you make it 40, 40, 20, or, you know, if you make it 30, 30, 30, it's gonna, the volume will change. So if volume is what we're after, then there's lots of things that are gonna, there are lots of variables in there that are gonna change that. And I don't know, I'm a little afraid of someone saying, well, this is the winner because the volume's greater. And you say, okay, well.
well, that's what people want in terms of being able to build a home with a large square footage, so they can for resale purposes. I mean, it's square footage that seems to be the issue.
But I don't think we're trying to solve for max volume. I don't think that's the
That's my question.
criteria of the winner. We're
Yeah.
wanting to see, this is the volume that you can build within, and can you build reasonably? That's the hard part to decide.
Yeah,
What's
what is
reasonable.
that? Yeah.
But can you build reasonably within that volume on a sampling of 5 lots? And,
Right.
and then we'll see, how does that differ between this one and that one? Okay, on the, you know, back to front, side to side slope, the parallel plane gives you a challenge in this area, or the segmenting gives you a challenge because of the depth of this lot, and the 40 foot, 30 foot gives you a challenge. I think it's getting them to put 5 lots into a model. And then I think one of the questions at the initial conversation is, you know, once we get this in, we think that it would be easy to iterate off of that. If we wanted to change the 40 foot to 30, is that an easy change to make? And then it may be sort of a living kind of breathing thing that we could, you know, play with to a
Yeah,
certain
you know,
extent.
it occurred to me, after our last meeting, you know, that if you took, if you took the segments and made them infinitely small, it becomes the calculus problem on the first page of your calculus book. All of a sudden, you know, consider a plane, or consider a curve with an infinite number of slices in it, you know, and all that. It's literally that. It becomes a parallel plane.
Yeah, I think that's the idea, is trying to not make it infinite, trying to create slabs. And I don't think it was arbitrary in the 40 feet.
So the shorter those segments, the closer you are to making me happy. So, anyway.
Well, the 40 feet I don't think was arbitrary. It was, I forget the math that Mike was running through, but if your average lot is 100 feet wide, and you take 25 feet off of that for the setback, right? So you're at 75 feet. And then 75 feet times 40 feet gets you, I don't have the math,
3,000 or so.
gets you a 3,000 square foot
Right.
Flat level.
flat floor. That was the idea, as opposed to arbitrary.
All right.
So you swing that back from 40 to 30, that would shrink.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, Brooke, just to maybe assuage a little bit of your concerns, I mean, I think the concept, and maybe it needs to be cleaned up a little bit before it goes to the architects or whoever, is the first segment starts at the front of the house, where you place it, right? And so, I don't know that there's a single house in Rollingwood deeper than 100 feet. Do you follow me? So it doesn't start at the curb, this would start at where the structure starts. So that's where the segment starts and flows, and so I think it'd be like I just don't think that there's a house that's and maybe it's 40, and whatever's left, right, for the last bit.
Here's my concern.
In case you have a really deep lot, like,
Well,
not
there's
trying to,
some really deep lots on Hatley where there's like the creek, and I mean the houses are like 300 feet back at the back of the park. Well, yeah, I mean we're not going to segment all the way down there. You where do you decide to place your house? You start the segment there
At the front
at
of the
front
house?
facade of the house,
Okay.
which helps with the other
Well-
irregular lots and whatever.
What I see with the segment approach is that for any given lot, you are imposing a box of a given depth, starting at the building line, and the height of that box will be uniform across that segment regardless of what the topography is. And the parallel plane would require that the box follow the slope of the hill, or that you excavate to the allowed height. You excavate to achieve the maximum wall height. That's really the difference we have. And so the concern I have is that on, if you take the house at Rollingwood Drive and Riley, the one that generated the first concern about this, it slopes to the back. That lot slopes from the street to the house behind it. And the segment approach would say, instead of, it's basically a box today, a rectangular box today that sits on that property well above the lot below it. Under the segment approach, you would have reduced the height of that box in 3 stages. So it would be better than what is there today, depending on where your reference, what your reference datum is. With parallel plane, you would not have had any, instead of the maximum of 35 feet at any given line of the buildable area, you would have that house follow the slope of the hill, so that at the lowest point, the maximum height, the lowest point of the property closest to the neighbor, that wall would not exceed 35 feet at that low point. With a segment approach, it would exceed 35 feet at that low point by the half of the difference in the change in elevation from the front of that segment to the back of that segment.
That's right.
That's the difference.
Well, I think you're focused on height. I think
I am focused on height.
Yeah, and I think
Yes.
Mike's proposal is only about tinting and said, then
Well,
let's figure out height after that.
but it allows the change in a datum reference, so it's not just tinting.
Well, but once we figure out the tinting, then we have to say where we want the height, and which is where
Well,
we can address that concern.
How do you, if you're using a datum reference, you're necessarily setting a height.
No, because you define the height from the reference. So,
That's what the proposal does.
but the proposal doesn't have anything to do with height. It didn't even propose what the height would be. It was where do we start the tint, and then the tint you draw up, and it intersects, and then we see what that allows. And then we decide, okay, do we want to lop it off here or here or here? I mean, you could do this tinting with the segment. And you could say the height's 20 feet, max height. This is just about tinting. It's creating the volume and the tint at the sides that you can build within, and then you pick where you want to cut it off for height after that.
If that's what the proposal, is that the proposal, Mike?
Mhm.
So the
Just
tenting, there
tenting,
would,
not height, just tenting, yeah.
there, in your first 40-foot segment, you've got an infinite height on any one segment.
Clearly, I didn't say an infinite height. I mean, you don't get an infinite height because at some point the 45-degree lines intersect, right?
The what lines intersect?
But you're drawing two 45-degree lines from property lines. They're at different heights, but at some point they intersect, right? And so it's not infinite. But just if you just did tenting and you didn't say anything about max height, it doesn't go to infinity. At some point, those two lines intersect, right?
I didn't see, so you're saying that the height in your proposal would be the line where the 45-degree angle from the curb intersects with what?
It will. Well, it's not the curb. It's from the property line. But the 45-degree line from one property line will intersect with the other side at some point. Right?
With the other side, with the 45-degree angle from the other side?
From the other side property line. So they're gonna, make on a flat lot, it's a house, right? If they're sloping side to side, one is from here, and they're, intersecting somewhere in the lot. And yeah, it's gonna be more than 35 feet, but I didn't make any proposal around what the height within the segment is. And I think what you're going to find when you go model the parallel plane approach, I think what you're going to find on the steeper lots is that it's not volume. Like, I think
Well, let's go back to the 45-degree angle. Doesn't that set a maximum height
sure, it sets a boundary.
within a segment?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, and that's what I was saying when I was talking about volume. I was trying to,
It
you
does, but
can't
it
break
could be
that
greater
line.
than 35 feet. It could certainly be that, and that's what, depending
gonna
on the
happen in the
width,
very middle.
depending on the width of the tent, you've got a 45-degree, and, if the tent is very wide, then that 45-degree is going to intersect very high. It could be 60 feet, but if it's narrow, then it might not even make 35 feet. Might not even do
There are
it.
gonna be lots that you probably can't get 35.
No, I doubt that, but it could. Yeah,
There you
it's
go.
possible. It's possible. But so the idea, I think, and I don't know that Mike is ready to carry it this far, is that you would establish 45-degree intersection. You got to lop it off at 35 feet. You don't want to use 35, but
No, I said.
you do have to lop
no,
it off. Yeah, you're gonna have to lop it off. Now, at what point do you lop it off? As you're going, you're in a sloped area and you've got the segment and all that. That's what needs to be considered. Where do you lop it off? Where do we say it can't exceed 35 feet at this
Okay.
point?
So, one more question, because I don't, if you're going from the sides of the property at a 45-degree angle to the center of the property, that's one
Not necessarily the center, but at some point, yes.
of the
If
segment.
there's slope, it won't be the center, cause one will be, if it's side sloping.
Okay,
Right.
I see what you're
Yeah.
saying. But what about back to front? Are
Nothing,
you just tinting side to side or back to front as well?
Side to side.
just side to side.
So there's no
Yeah,
tinting along the rear or along the front?
If you, as proposed, no. I think the reason for drawing these different scenarios are, I think there's been a lot of conversation around lots that slope upwards from the street and how those houses appear larger, right? And so maybe to some extent, once we get these drawings back, we might look at that and go, does that feel right? I don't know. But if you just were to take the 15 feet at a property line and slope at 45 and apply the same rule to a front or rear property line, by the time you get to a front setback or a rear setback or even the rear setback, which is less, you're at 35 feet. So if you're gonna go and, you know, try to apply tinting to try to cut off volume on the front or the back, then you have to come up with a whole different formula. And I think, you know, at least from what I hear from pretty much everybody, it's all about the sides. I just don't hear, rarely do I hear, oh, you know, the front of this house ruined by privacy or whatnot.
We
Yeah, 'cause
have
you've
the,
got the front setback, which like,
The-
it's like, that already gives you 30 feet buffer.
the problem though that we have that one of the problem houses that we began with was the house at Riley and Rollingwood Drive, where the backs up to is on the downside of a slope and it's looming over the neighbor.
Yeah, but I think we've talked about that house ad nauseum, and you know, I think everyone. It's like, if that was a 2-story house, it's looming over the neighbor. If it's a 1-story house, I mean, it's just the topography is such that no matter what someone built, they're going to be staring in their backyard. It's on a hill.
I think, well, that's a matter of opinion. I have a different opinion. Thank you.
Well, that one, you could still be at 35 feet
That's,
under the parallel plane at the rear.
that's right.
I understand that.
And that would happen with the
Yeah.
segmenting, or at least it would get close to it. Segmenting
I mean,
would
the
do
difference
close
in
to
height
the same
between
thing.
segmenting and parallel plane in the middle of the lot is
Yeah.
going to be like 2 to 3, 4 feet. Like it's going to be a nothing.
That's right.
Like it's like we're not talking about. That's why I keep saying when we draw this, I feel like
We'll see
that's
it.
just not going to be a big point of contention. I think it's going to be look what's happening at the side of these properties. Can people build flat floors or not of reasonable size?
And
Don't
My-
we have enough on this issue?
my concern with respect to the proposal, as I saw it last week, was there just weren't enough details for it to be drawn. The segment proposal, there just weren't enough details for it to be drawn so that you could see what is actually being proposed and what. So the discussion has been helpful. And if it doesn't solve some of the problems, council needs to know that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mr. Nash, you had something to say?
I think it sounds like we've got a good, clear direction to send. I think that it makes sense to move on to our other agenda items unless anybody else feels there's more discussion that needs to be
Yeah,
had.
well, I don't know that we've nailed this down completely yet.
Okay.
Okay, so I think we've got a couple of constraints, a couple of things that we're gonna give our architect to do. I would ask that we include in this discussion just that, what would be the mechanism to figure out where the maximum building height was. I know where it is with the parallel plane, but in tenting, or excuse me, in a segmenting approach, we would want to ask the question, how do we establish where the maximum height is?
I thought we just said we were going to average all 4 points.
Average 4 points and 35 feet.
So you want to take it from that average point, that same point?
Well, it's a different point. The tinting is from
With it-
different points than what we're talking about for the height.
Okay, what we said was we're gonna use the datum for the tenting based on the average across the segment, right?
No, the tinting is in Mike's presentation from the last meeting, which is the higher of the 2 points on either side. And if we do it, this we're confusing on the lot line versus the setback line, but let's just say the setback line.
Okay.
So 10 feet in, there's a 40-foot line.
Yeah.
And there's a high point and a low point.
Right.
And you take the, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, you take the high point and 25 feet
15. In the slope.
at the property line. I'm saying at the setback line, it would be 25.
That's what the slope is, but.
Okay.
on a flat
Okay,
lot,
well,
yeah.
if we're doing it both ways, so
Yeah, if we're doing it both
yeah,
ways.
if we're
then
doing it both
20.
ways on the way that you're thinking of at the
No, he was,
buildable line.
Yeah, I thought that what we were saying is that we, early on in this discussion, I thought we were saying we were establishing the datum based on the average of the four corners.
That's what we were talking about for height, not for tinting.
Aha, ooh, I missed that.
Because we were saying this is tinting, and he's got a specific proposal for tinting. You said, well, we got to come up with something to get the consultant for height. So then we said, okay, give them the 4 points and 35 feet. We'll start there.
and you wanna start at the high point, so if you go down, you get a higher and higher wall,
Right.
and you could at that scenario end up 6 foot higher.
Mm.
At the other end of it,
You
correct.
get to 40
And that's a way to look at it.
Okay.
They was saying, take your 25 in the middle of the 40.
I like that.
I don't think, he was talking about the
Yeah, yeah.
4 points
Okay.
averages, which we talked about
I
for
can
height.
see-
I see what you're
okay,
saying,
okay,
that's another
okay.
way to do it.
Got it. Good.
But,
Put-
of course,
Please.
This would be another way to do it.
yeah, well, if you take your high point in the middle, you're gonna end up with a lower sidewall for your neighbor. Okay.
At one end, but yeah, that wasn't what he proposed, but yeah, I agree.
Well, I know, but I'm just saying that, you start at the high, and then instead of being 25 feet, 40 feet away, you're 31 feet to your neighbor.
Agreed. I think what we're trying to figure out now is what do we have them draw? And then I think hopefully they have it all in and we can iterate so we can play around with that.
I just, I'm putting some guardrails up now, or warnings that, 31 feet on the sidewall is gonna be objectionable.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the point of this is to figure out what works. Like, I think there's a whole
Well,
other side of this that says that,
yeah, what-
that 19 feet at a sidewall on parallel plane is objectionable.
25 feet at the low and go the other way. Go up.
We can
I'm-
come up,
Agreed.
we can come
I
up
think-
with 1,000 things.
I think that's a discussion for another
Yeah.
day, yeah.
No, it's gonna be pretty soon.
After we get the drawings, yeah.
Yeah, well,
Mm.
I'm just sending up warnings now. I think 25 feet, or you get much about 25 feet, I'm gonna have objections to it.
Understood?
Okay. All right. I want this written up and somehow reviewed with everybody so that we're all nodding in agreement that this is what we agreed to. And I don't know how to do that offline. Do we have to wait until the next P and Z meeting before we can get that to happen?
I mean, to get the entire group to vote to act on it, yes. I mean, you could have a small subcommittee that talks about it offline.
Okay, so then,
Do we need that? Like, can we put together like a small little committee? I don't think this is a lot of work
yeah,
to just put this little proposal together. I don't know when council meets next, because I think council has to approve some money. Send that to council and say, will council approve this?
yeah.
And then we can do something.
Here's where we are. We've got a plan to have a public meeting on January 10th at P and Z to make a recommendation to the council on a proposal. So between now and then, there's not a lot of time. I think if you could define the 4 points you're talking about for height, because different people are saying different things, I don't think it's clear what the 4 points are for tinting versus however many points there are for height. So if those 2 points could be clarified, I think there's enough to draft it up.
Draft what?
Draft up the proposal that you would want to take to the consultant.
So
Define the proposal at least well enough for the council to take it up and decide whether or not to fund it at the
So-
council meeting.
on the 10th.
The council meeting is this month in December 18.
So they could approve this exercise on the 18th. Is that
It's, yes.
okay? And then you're saying
It,
that
it,
on the
that-
10th,
it's possible, yes.
but then you're saying that on the 10th, what is happening?
Well, the next P and Z meeting is on the 8th. Sorry about that. It's Wednesday, January 8th.
Yeah, it's too short.
The public hearing on proposals is January the 8th. for P and Z.
Public.
What does that mean?
What does that mean?
When a zoning change is being proposed, the P and Z has to make a recommendation with regard to that proposal in a public hearing
But
and
that would
send
be a
it,
real ordinance,
and send it to the council.
for a real ordinance.
Well, that's what we're trying to get to.
Yeah, but is there an expectation that that's gonna happen by the 8th?
Yes,
Our
there
meeting
is
on the
an,
8th?
that's what the council took up at its last meeting, was to set the dates for public hearings for P and Z on the CRCRC proposal and, any other proposals.
I don't know if the building height was necessarily on that list because it wasn't in that format yet. We have like 4 other topics coming to that public hearing process.
Yeah.
Fences, trees.
I thought
Yeah,
the
we're not
building
ready
height
to
was.
go with
Setback
that.
extensions or
We don't,
something.
yeah, we don't have height.
Okay, I take that back on
Yeah,
timing.
yeah, we're not gonna
I
get,
thought that was
yeah.
the
so-
expectation was that height would be on there too. But I think you could draft up the proposal for the consultant if
Yeah.
you had, for the segment proposal, the height, how the height would be
Uh-huh.
determined and how the tinting would be, the height for purposes of tinting.
Yeah, I would like to have some substance for the next P and Z meeting. That is, that we would have by the next P and Z meeting, identified the properties that we're gonna do. We would have the permissions, we would have what it is, these things that these criteria that we had just spelled out. And we might even have talked with several architects to get some sort of idea of what it cost. By next P and Z meeting, not by city council. And next P and Z meeting, of course, is gonna be this public hearing. But we could still talk about it then and know where we are, and are we agreed that we're gonna go to city council and ask for appropriation for that?
Okay, I think that's a reasonable plan.
All right?
I was even wondering, is there, I mean, I agree we have to have some sort of outline to give the architect. I think whatever we put together, it's gonna also require conversation with the architect to
No question.
clarify, make sure
No
everybody's on the same
question.
page.
Yeah.
I would think that city council would probably like to have, as opposed to just having, here's something that we can give to an architect. The main question is, what is this gonna cost? It seems like to me. So I was just wondering, is there a faster track to, maybe we can get some bullet points, have a conversation, like I said, with the architect. Can you tell us about what this would cost? Because I think really what the cost is how much will it cost to get these 5 surveys into your system so that you can play with it, based on the guidance that we give you, which we'll have 2 options in there. And then from there, once they get it all in and done, I think it's easy to change things. So I'm wondering if there's a way to have a conversation more quickly so that we can get a cost estimate to city council more quickly. I don't want to spend a month, iterating on a proposal and lose that time.
I think what I'm trying to get to is at least a proposal that we can take to city council this time next month. That we have something.
I was hoping
solid.
with a cost estimate.
With a cost estimate,
Yeah.
yes.
I was hoping maybe we could even do it quicker, but I don't know.
Yeah. Well, Christmas and everything.
Yeah, that's true.
It's harder.
We're
to
all
think.
going on vacation starting next week, basically, right?
All right,
I do feel
Well,
like December goes.
I have my resume ready for you.
okay. Let's make that a goal. Okay, just make that a goal. We'll see if we can do that. Otherwise, it'll go to February, right?
I think we can hit January for sure.
Yeah.
I think trying to get it sooner is probably gonna be too difficult, but by the next meeting, I think that's a good goal, and then we've got the process continued.
Okay. Either I or Mike are gonna write these things out.
We can do it together.
And I would love that. That'd be my bet. That's my preference. Okay?
I'll refine mine a little bit based on this conversation and send it to you to look at.
All right, okay.
May I make a quick
It's like peanut butter and jelly
caveat?
coming together.
Architectural services fall under the Professional Procurement Act, Government Code. And there has to be an RFQ process. So you're not negotiating a contract and you're not presenting a final contract. You want to make sure you're just simply gathering information
Sure.
and getting an estimate, not a final deal.
Right.
And then the city will likely need to do an RFQ. And in my experience, these types of consulting arrangements, it's not uncommon to start with a very basic scope of work, and then as information becomes available, come in and do a supplemental addendum for additional work or additional questions or opinions to be asked. So that's just a very common thing with these types of agreements.
Are we allowed, does the RFQ have to have like a sufficient scope, or can we put out an RFQ for like hourly services just to fast track that process?
Exactly, you can do either way.
Isn't there, if we're doing something that is less than $10,000, don't we not have to go through that? I thought there was a $10,000 threshold that,
Like a de minimis amount.
Right.
If you set a not to exceed amount,
Yeah.
that may be a possibility.
yeah.
Do we know what that is?
And we're certainly not gonna get $10,000 out of council to do this. I know, that's,
I still think that's a really good point, though. I think this is something that the city council and staff, we can all figure out the mechanics of how we end up getting the bids, but I think getting the proposal refined here, getting that sent on to council as here's what we want to do, you know, they could then charge staff with putting out the required documentation to then you all could share with any architects who are interested, who would then be able to bid. Like we could see what that looks like. I don't know that. I think that's something that the city council and staff can handle if you all give us here's what we envision it to be like, and then we can go from there. So.
Well, the professional services, you can't award based on price, right?
Correct.
Based on
Right.
qualifications.
It's the first instance is qualifications, and then a fair and equitable price negotiating with that most qualified. And then if you can't come to an agreement, then you go to the next most qualified and work out a fair and reasonable price.
thank you.
It's more formal than I anticipated.
Yeah, me too.
Nothing is easy, nothing. All right, I think at least we have this fairly well nailed down, or at least I feel better about it. If there's no more discussion, we can move on to the next agenda item. All right, which is what? Discussion and possible action on proposed amendments to the city code of ordinances regarding side yard projections in residential zoning district. And I have to confess that I was to go back to CRCRC and get better definition as to what they had intended, because we were looking at the codified version of what CRCRC had done, and I had not done that. I do have that on the agenda for the next CRCRC meeting, which is next week. I'm sorry?
So you're postponing this one.
So I think I have to postpone this one. I didn't deliver. I can't deliver what I promised.
I thought CRCRC was, I didn't know y'all were still meeting. I thought it would have been terminated.
No, we are trying to terminate. That is actually gonna be one of our agenda items up here. Are you guys all right with that? That's part of it.
Motion to
so
terminate.
We can't terminate ourselves.
I think also, Dave,
I didn't realize
know
that.
we talked about this, you know, after that meeting. I think you had a pretty good grasp on what was the intent of the CRCRC when they did pass on their recommendation. So this ordinance was changed from what was in your packet last month to better reflect that. You know, I think it's better and does a lot more of what it was supposed to. So it actually has been amended since last time. I know you didn't take it back to the CRCRC, but we all kind of spoke about it, and you know, I think we had a pretty good grasp on what the intention was from the CRCRC.
Okay, so there's something here that is new.
Yes.
Dave, I'm giving you a free pass on not talking to CRCRC, and I think it makes sense to go ahead and take a look at this one since we're here.
Well, since it's different, and we have I haven't looked at it. I didn't know it was different. I would have looked at it if I thought it was different.
You have it's been a couple weeks. We ran it through legal and everything to make sure it was right. Councilmember Brown helped us kind of draft this up to make sure it really met that intent.
Okay.
I think it's on page 11.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, before there were just some amendments, I think made to a later, I think it was to section F of this section, and it didn't quite take into account what had already been written in section E, so this is just a cleaner amendment that takes into account everything that we talked about last month.
It provides more consistency and clarity, and I personally, I think the word extend is much better than the word overhang. So it kind of modernizes the language and flows a little better.
So are we ready to start talking about this?
Yeah, let's talk.
I had one question to make sure
Yeah.
I understood. I think the intent was to not have anything other than a roof extension get within 10 feet of a property line. And I guess I was just wondering, this may be some legalese here, but so all other ordinary projections may extend a maximum of 2 feet into a required yard having a width greater than 10 feet.
Yes.
So I guess my question is if you were at 11 feet and it extends 2 feet, now it's to 9 feet, or is the way this required yard, does that mean either 15 or 10?
I concur that if you had 10 feet there, you could end up 8 feet from the property line, so it should say at least 12 feet.
Well, it says no building feature other than an eave or roof extension may extend into a side yard having a width of 10.
That's right.
This is line 44,
Yeah. No building. That's right.
having a width greater than 12 feet.
It says 10 feet.
I think Jerry's pointing out it should be 12. If the
The
intent,
first 10,
yeah, the 10 at line 44.
No, that's wet.
In-
Oh, sorry.
So what this is saying is you've got eaves
Greater than 10.
and roof extensions. They can go up to 33% into a side yard. For anything else, all other ordinary projections, you can extend a maximum of only 2,
2 feet.
but it has to be greater than, it says 10. I think the intent was probably 12.
It was 12
So that
and
if
a
you
half.
extend 2,
Yes.
you're only in up to
Yeah.
10.
The CRCRC said 12 and a half feet. And with the idea that it would be half of the 25-foot requirement between houses. Okay. So that would need to be changed on this. Because this says you can go in, well, anything you can.
I'd change it
well, that was
to
my
12.
question. I don't really know
Into
what the
10 feet
definition of
into a
required yard
required
is.
yard having a width greater than 10 feet. But it really should be with no less than 12 and a half feet.
Is there a definition of ordinary, other ordinary projections? What is that?
Help me out.
I don't know what ordinary means.
Yeah,
Where are we
other
at?
projections hard for me to
Where are we
articulate.
I think it would just be anything but a roof or an eave. So if you had
Yeah,
like
but is that-
if you had like a,
Fireplace, maybe,
Okay.
or what are we talking
Right.
about?
Yeah,
Is that
I think- I think
is it a
it's-
fireplace? Is it a?
yeah.
I think it's a bay
Okay,
window,
okay.
a
Yeah.
fireplace,
Okay.
maybe it's a deck,
No, but
balcony.
I don't. That's what I'm saying.
It's existing language, and so that was just what's always been there.
But that's an undefined term. Is it? Is that? I'm asking. Sorry.
Likely, yeah, I have to go back and look at our definition section, but.
Okay. Please.
Okay. The first sentence is eaves and roofs into a side yard can go a maximum of 33% of the side yard.
Right.
So that's 3.3 feet into a 10-foot setback, but it's a third not, it's defined by a third.
Right.
33%. The next sentence, eaves and roof extensions into a required front or rear yard, that's 5 feet. The third sentence is all other ordinary projections of building features other than roofs and eaves may extend a maximum of 2 feet into a required yard having a width greater than 10 feet. So this is other projections can go into a side yard having a width greater than 10 feet to a maximum of 2 feet. And then the last sentence says, no building feature other than an eave or roof may extend into a side yard having a width of 10 feet or less.
So,
So it eliminates, the last sentence eliminates other building features other than roofs or extensions in a side yard of 10 feet or less.
I hear you. That's a fair point. So what you're saying is that last sentence is kind of a catch-all that keeps anything else besides a roof or an eave from
And
going
yes,
in.
and that was the concern of the CRCRC.
Good
well,
point,
do-
Brooke.
but there
does
is,
it? I mean, I guess my question is, what if it's just you happen to pictures at 11 feet? And doesn't the first
The
43
last
and
sentence-
44 let you go in, then you could go 2 feet, so you'd be at 9 feet, right?
Yeah, but then the
But
last
the-
sentence.
But no,
that's
but you're,
not
but it's a yard having a width of 10 feet or less. I've just established the yard is 11 feet in my situation.
No, yard is the setback. Like, that's how our code uses
Okay,
setbacks.
so it
is
doesn't
we use
matter
in
where I
terms of
put my
yard.
building.
Yeah, we think of yard as like everything in my yard, right? But like, in terms of this code, your side yard is that 10-foot, what we're using colloquially as a setback.
yeah.
So if you have your house set at 11 feet, you now have a side yard from 11 foot to the property line. That's
Right.
the yard when it
Right,
says
and can
required
I
yard.
extend something 2 feet?
Yeah.
out?
No, because that last sentence says no thing other than an eave or roof may extend into that 11 feet.
Well,
Having
no, but it's not 10 feet or less. It's 11 feet.
Right.
oh, good point.
See,
So there is
now-
ambiguity there.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
It could
You're
be.
right. So
it
these-
So
could-
the way you could fix it that I was playing with is you could say, no ordinary projection, for clarification, no ordinary projection can be closer to a property line than 10 feet.
Yeah, on the last sentence. Yeah.
that works.
All that being said, I've not been,
Okay.
I was fine with
I
what it
think
used
you
to
just
be,
aced it.
but
Yeah,
anyway,
no,
that's the intent, I think.
No,
more people
you're right.
trying to-
You're right. There's. That didn't seem to
Can
work.
can we make that change? I think you're right.
Does
I
that
think
make
works,
sense?
That works.
We can do whatever we
I'm
want,
not
Dave.
following what you're,
Well, I'm
where-
just
where
saying, so
the-
we have our
where's the
definition of
11
side.
feet? In which sentence are you trying to
Well,
address?
so let's establish this. We've got to have 25 feet of side yard. We can have it 10
You
to
want to have
15
25 feet of side yard.
in total.
Well, you're either going to have 10 or 12 or 15. You, the property
No,
owner.
you have any
can
number
have
you
10
want.
feet 6 inches if you want.
Yeah.
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 I'm sorry,
As long as it adds up to 25.
you're not talking about a required yard. Start over, please.
So I'm saying, I'm establishing we got 25 feet to work with, so I can do 10 and 15
25 feet of what?
of side yard combined.
There's
between
25
two
feet
houses.
between your house and the property line. Is
No,
that
I'm
what
talking
you're?
about on a given lot. I have a total of 25 feet to work with. I can do 10 on one side and I can do 15 on the other. I can do 12 and 13.
Okay, now I know what you're talking about.
Okay, so if I choose to do 11 and 14, whatever, that's how the house.
I don't think
made
you,
most sense.
I don't think you,
You can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure you can.
yeah, you can.
Minimum of 10, total
Well,
of 25.
Aggregate
It's gotta
is
be
25.
25 between houses.
between houses.
Between houses.
No,
No.
that's not a rule.
No, it's
It's
not.
on your lot. You get.
Yeah.
There's 2 restrictions on side yards. Minimum of 10. Total has to add up to 25 on a single
On a single
person's
lot.
lot.
Yeah.
So you could end up.
That needs to be changed, but
You could choose to have 15 and 15 and have 30 feet, but you
Or 10 and 10,
Right.
you end up
You
with
have to have an
20.
aggregate of 25.
you have to have at least 25.
Yeah, you can.
Cannot have 10 and
you
10.
have to have 25.
No, I mean, I was addressing your point, which is between
10 on
two
one lot,
adjacent
10 on the
lots,
other.
you could have a 10 and a 10.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's.
Or a 20
it's-
and a 20.
The wording in the ordinance is the side yard shall have a minimum width of 10 feet when the lot abuts another lot, except that the sum total of the two side yards of any lot shall not be less than 25 feet of any lot.
any
So
lot.
it's
Of any
not.
lot.
Yeah,
yeah.
it's the same
Okay.
lot.
Yeah.
All right, now we got the
So what I'm saying is
hypothetical.
that for whatever reason, I do
In
11 and
fairness,
I've only
14.
been
It's
confused
super
on this.
confusing.
So I-
It's super confusing.
So I do 11 and 14, so my 11 is
It's
greater
not
than 10
easy
feet.
Thing to get.
And so that says I can now extend an ordinary projection 2 feet, meaning it will be within 9 feet of my neighbor. And I don't think this last sentence is a catch-all.
I think it's a catch-all. I think it cuts you off.
You
No
know,
building feature other than an eave or roof extension cuts off all other ordinary
But may
projections.
extend into a side yard having a width of 10 feet or less. My side yard is 11 feet.
yeah, he actually raised a good point. The way they word it,
I
it's,
get,
it's
yeah.
so if you said this,
May extend any
No
closer than
closer
10 feet to
Right.
the
10
property
feet,
line.
1 inch,
That's
you can
right.
go to 8 feet, 1 inch.
10 feet from the
10
property
feet to the
line
property
works.
line.
Ten-
So,
Yeah.
this is
No,
why it takes
no
all
ordinary
these eyes
projection
looking
will
at
be
these
closer
things.
than 10 feet.
10
to
feet
the property line.
from the property
Yeah.
line, that's right.
That sounds,
That works.
All right, I'm retiring right now.
Yep. Hang it up.
I found something nobody else did. I'm retiring.
All right,
It was well played, sir.
so,
Change the other one to 12.
when we talked about this 2 years
I don't think
ago, we made allowances for chimneys.
and bay windows.
I think we're taking that allowance away.
I think it's still there.
Okay,
It's there, just
You
can't
just
be
can't
closer
go.
than
You can't
10
go.
feet.
Before we had it, if you were
So-
at the 10 foot, you
Right.
could
You can go to
effectively go to
8,
8
yeah.
feet.
all right. Are we,
Which I still prefer
Chimneys
anyway,
is
but that's
addressed
fine.
in paragraph G,
sorry,
and
what?
it still remains as it is.
What's that?
Chimneys is addressed in, we've only got one subsection of this section, which we don't have the whole section, so this subsection doesn't affect subsection G, which addresses chimneys. Chimneys may encroach into a required side yard a maximum of 2 feet.
right.
So-
Well, then does that
I
conflict
guess
with,
it should
do
be
we have
on this-
conflicting
This takes
provisions?
that away.
Yeah.
I guess it's
I
saying
think we
that
just
chimney is not.
It doesn't
ordinary
address
projection,
it.
right?
Chimneys are addressed,
As an
Other-
exception,
Well, but then it
think
just
my knee
conflicts
is
with
hitting.
is
the.
that right? So it's an exception?
if you read the paragraph, there is an express provision for chimneys.
It's an E.
That's an E.
Yeah.
It would control
So
over
that's a good.
So
more
if we
general
want that to-
language. What
see.
you're assuming is a chimney
I
would
think
be a
it's-
projection.
Right.
Okay.
Well, if we wanted to leave that, we could say any
Chimneys
ordinary
are
projection
addressed
other than a chimney.
specifically in subsection G, so, and that's not changed.
So,
I'm retiring.
so they're in conflict with each other a little
I
bit.
can't be on.
Yeah.
Let's
If
do it
you
like for
consider a
chimney.
chimney an ordinary projection, then that would be in conflict, but because it's spelled out separately and distinctly, I think it would be addressed separately and distinctly.
I think it's not an ordinary projection.
It's not an
because it-
ordinary projection.
But it is definitely a building feature other than an eave or roof extension.
Yeah, I think that's a conflict. I mean, I think we should resolve it. I just don't want us to be here in 2 more years with somebody with a chimney going, no, look at G. G says I can be in the setback. And then somebody's pointing back to E and they're like, no, you can't go past 10 feet because the chimney, even though it says you can go into the setback, it's restricted by E. And then we got this whole like dance all over again.
Yeah.
So do we know the CRCRC intent as it relates to chimneys?
I believe that the CRCRC intent on chimneys was not to be closer than 10 feet to the property line.
We
I
can be
believe
our own
that's what
body
it
and make a decision on this if we want. However, legally, can we affect G?
Under conflict of law principles, the more specific provision rules. So the chimney provision would preempt or rule.
Well, what I'm asking, have we noticed G such that we could propose a change to G as we're sitting here today, if we wanted to? Because it says it's discussion next steps or a possible action on proposed amendments in side yard projections.
Sounds like-
Now, specifically, we're talking about E but wouldn't that encompass G as well? So are we?
You can talk about anything in this section because we're not even. I mean, we haven't even.
Oh, we're
noticed
not
for a
taking
public
possible
hearing.
action?
Yeah, this would
Okay.
just be we're ready. Your action would be to send it on to council and say we're ready for the public hearing process if that's what you wanted to do. So you could talk
I'd-
about that whole section.
I'd say we
107,
delete
76.
G and keep E the way we just modified it. That would be what I would propose, just to get some simplification. The conflicts of law thing, I hear you, but I remember us being here on the conflict in the RV provision. And you remember the RV thing?
Oh,
It
I
was
do.
like you can park it, but you can't put it in but you could have it on the side street, but not in drive. It was it was hard to say which was the more specific, and they did seem to conflict. And it was like we just need to have one plan. So I would.
Well, yeah, and if you
I
have
would say we
somebody in
address-
who's finished their architectural plans and is ready to build, and that's not anything we want to have happen.
Yeah, legally speaking, this trumps that, and they're like,
And then
nobody
Nikki's
told me
sitting
that.
there, and she got.
You end up in court.
So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
what you're suggesting is that we take G out completely?
Well, if the
If the
we
intent,
should
yeah.
decide now. Do we care about should chimneys be a special exception to the exception, or do we think it should just be 10 feet and that's like a firm wall that nothing should go past? If that's the case, which is I think the intent behind E, then we should drop G.
I think we should, personally, I think we should take them back to 10 feet because we are also talking about the context of tinting. So I think from a practical perspective, you're going to cut all the chimneys off anyways.
Yeah.
So maybe that's something that will come up when we look at some drawings to where we're going to allow an exception of a chimney because there's lots of chimneys on the side and they're going to be over 20 some odd feet. So
there
I
is
think they have that in
there's
theirs,
a
yeah.
intent 10771. There is a maximum permissible height that says no portion of the building or structure except a chimney, attic vent, lightning rod, or any equipment required by the city building.
well, yeah, but we're going to change all that, right? That's
I know, but you could bake that kind of thing in from a height standpoint.
we may need to. I don't know.
Well, it's the two of you guys that get to figure that
Well,
out.
We'll be back for your opinion.
I think we're looking for a motion here on what to recommend to city council. And
And then
we've
it comes
already
back
decided
for
that
hearing.
we think we want to do it 10 feet from the property line. And we think we know that, that this doesn't pertain to overhangs or eaves. But the question about chimney is in there, and we could add that in here, in this 10776E, and say, no building feature other than eave or roof extension or chimney may extend into a side yard. You could do that. Or we can get rid of G.
Well, I think you catch it in no building feature. So I like the idea of deleting G. I think that makes sense. My only other question would be, and for one of the attorneys here is all other ordinary projections, is that defined enough? I mean, or question for staff. I mean, has that ever come up with
Should we
is
say
this
examples?
Is this ordinary? Is this not ordinary? Do we need more definition for staff to implement this?
Yes, because I personally have an objection to people putting their pool equipment and their air conditioners in that 10-foot
Well, this
space.
is
I think that's a separate
I
conversation we're
know,
talking
but
about too.
I know, but what is the definition of a building feature?
I think it's part of the building. First off, it has to be part of the building.
6 types from, what's this, Westlake, Ohio. Number 1's architectural feature, 2 is entrance feature, 3 shelter enclosed, 4 shelter unenclosed, 5 shading device solid, 6 is shading device open. And they have different setbacks for it. And they define projections. Is a part of a feature of a building that
Is
extends outside of the
CRC
building walls.
going to meet again?
They are going to meet again next.
Is
next
it
week.
too much to ask CRC to
It is-
define
it is
ordinary
not.
projections
It
and
is-
let us know what you think?
Well, again, I believe that during the discussion about this, the chimney was included as part of the ordinary projections being discussed.
yeah, I would think
I
it's
mean, if I went back
chimneys,
and I
bay
listened to the
windows.
tapes, I'm sure I can come up with that, but I think that's where we were. This, by the way, was not my idea. This was the group saying, we want this to do, and and on and on. I don't think I voted yes on this,
I
so.
I would suggest to not define it. I think something like this is meant to be anything else. I think ordinary is a little bit squishy, but like my fear in trying to define it is you're gonna miss something, and it's like overcomplicating it. Like, have we run into some issue where people have weird projections that are not ordinary?
Well, I mean, it's saying,
I don't know.
yeah, I
And
guess
it-
is this
and-
saying you are allowed to have an extraordinary projection?
So, well, in any event, what E is doing is it's setting a vertical wall at 10 feet. Nothing can get into it, and all it's allowing for is if you actually have a side yard at 12 feet or 14, you could go 2 more feet in with something.
Yeah.
Right? And it maybe that something is a little bay window. And keep in mind it's 2 feet, so we're talking like that, right? It's a bay window, or it's a little chimney jut out, or it's something. But like, do we really need to parse what an ordinary projection would be? And when we're talking about that into from 14 feet into 12, I feel like we're over litigating the thing.
I agree that the term ordinary projections, the drafting intent is to make it broad. You don't want to lose control by starting to make a list and then maybe miss something. It's best to keep it broad. Maybe that's the intent, just for the city to have that control.
Why do we need the word ordinary? Shouldn't it just be all other projections of building features typically used? I mean, we're trying to eliminate all projections, right?
Well, I think
That
you
would imply
eliminate.
that you
I
can
think
do
you
something
eliminate
that's
all projections.
not
Yeah.
ordinary.
How's it written? Let me
All
see.
other ordinary.
And all other
I'm trying to get a
projections.
sense here from this group as to whether or not chimneys are allowed within 10 feet or not.
I mean, I've said all along, I kind of liked the way we did it before because I thought it created some, features on the outside of the building, but I fully appreciate a lot of other people, wanting the sanctity of the setback to be held. I think the unintended consequence that may come from this is you're managing to spec builders who are maximizing. That's where most of these problems come from. And with the way we have it now, they're going to be incentivized to build a completely flat wall to the 10 foot with absolutely no features whatsoever because we're not allowing them. And, the alternative, which we had done before and we talked about a lot, was you allow a bay window, allow a chimney, and yes, it gets to 8 feet, but it's pick your poison. Is it worse to have a totally flat wall at 10 feet, or is it worse to have a couple of architectural features that break it up?
I think
And
that,
I fall on the other one, but it seems, I think CRCRC has talked about it a lot.
yeah,
And a lot of other people say, I don't care if it's a totally flat wall that the spec builder builds, we don't want anything in there. So if that's the case, fine, I'm fine with that, and then I think the chimney should be out of it.
okay. All right,
But I think we're gonna get spec houses with
so how,
flat walls.
is that what the group agrees to? Is that right? We all believe that?
I'm fine to delete G and leave it as is if staff's cool with it and we think it's sufficiently, unambiguous.
But G will allow the chimney to exist
So we delete it.
within, okay,
So we're gonna leave it.
that we delete it.
You said
All
delete,
right.
right?
I thought maybe we said
I
delete
think,
it.
Yeah,
are we,
delete. Well,
we kind of agreed on
delete.
this? We think we got this? I think we need a motion. Okay,
Nikki, does projections, is that gonna be easy enough?
That makes sense to
Yeah.
me.
Cool.
Okay.
It's existing language, so, yeah.
okay.
Would you please make a motion,
Oh,
Sorry?
God,
Please,
no.
you're the most
So-
qualified.
I'll move to, what are we doing? Recommending to city council that we provide a revision for public discussion and vote? Is that the context that this is supposed to be?
Well, we're making a recommendation.
Our
As
recommendation,
to what the
okay.
changes to the code are gonna be.
Yeah, okay, so our recommendation, as I understand it, I'll move that we recommend to city council that we modify section 107-76 as reflected in agenda item 5 with the following modifications, which would be to change the strike the word ordinary on line 41. Does that get you, Tony? Okay. And I think what we talked about was modifying the end of line 45 to say no building feature other than an eave or roof extension may extend into a side yard past 10 feet from a property line. In addition, we would propose deleting subsection G of section 10776. Did I capture everything?
Nicely done,
That
Mr.
would be my motion.
Nicely done.
See?
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I second it.
You second? Okay, very good. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'm sorry. I think you said that no building feature other than an eave or roof extension may extend into a side yard past 10 feet from the property line.
No. Shall be no closer.
Shall be
I
no
think,
closer.
right. Could we just maybe say that the intent is going to be that no projection can be closer to a property line than 10 feet, and then
You figure
we'll
out.
get the
Sure.
language refined before between now.
Sounds great.
I'll accept that as a friendly amendment.
Okay, very good.
I think that works.
We, okay.
I
We
was
have,
hoping you'd just nail it, right? But you know,
You know?
we need help. We need
Yeah,
help.
no,
I
you-
know what to say.
you got so close. All right, so we
Appreciate the
have a
assist.
motion, we have a second.
At least you're not an attorney.
Any further discussion?
Thanks, Tim.
All right, hearing none.
Yes, thank
All in
you.
favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Nicely done, commissioners. All right,
What else we got?
moving along
Oh, goody.
to regular agenda item number 6, update and discussion and possible action on a report from the accessory building and structure subcommittee and a recommendation for accessory buildings.
Mhm.
Subcommittee?
Is this not about packet?
Would you like to go, Jerry?
Sure. I had further thoughts after our 50 minutes and changed my mind on what we were supporting and may include some wrath, but I want to commend my fellow workers for thinking quickly, you know. I don't think that quick. I had to think about this a little bit. And the more I thought about it, I figured out I really didn't know much about setbacks and the history of them and how in the world they came from. I don't know. Okay. So I got with Tom Farrell and asked him for some history on setbacks in Rollingwood. And Ashley nicely had her office yesterday, and he versed me on a couple things. And I'll just go real quick here. Hatley got this originally back in Rollingwood, 1955 or so. About 100 acres of what he called a thicket, cedar thicket, and started putting all these roads and stuff in. And it came up somewhere about that time with our 20 and 30 foot setbacks. And then in about 1887, David Phillips came up with our 10776 minimum required law terms. And Tom Farrell was on the Board of Adjustment at this time, having monthly meetings because there was no other real official board involved. And accessory buildings were not allowed in the setback areas. But when somebody asked him if they wanted to come and put a tool shed in or something at the Board of Adjustment, he said, well, did any of the neighbors complain? No. And he said, well, I'm not going to act on it. Just go do it. And if we need to move it, we'll get some people out there and get it out of the way. And no, they weren't very tall, 7 foot or so tall. So neighbors didn't object, out of sight, nobody bothered them. They just let things go. Things were pretty informal back there. We had small houses, 2,100 square feet or so, and large septic tank fields, large yards. And then we got the gravity sewer system in, and then everything started building out to the lot lines. And that's where we're going now, is to the building lot lines, which leaves only our required minimum yards as the yard. And that's where, and when you start allowing accessory buildings in the required minimum yards, it's, your yard's gonna go away. And that's where I said, well, then Tom had the suggestion that there'd be a special exemption for accessory buildings like the Playhouse. First thing he asked was to see if there was any alternative location on the site for it to be, if any of the neighbors had any objections. The building height be maxed about 8, and this is where I differed with my colleagues. They wanted it 12 feet to 14 feet, and that's, and just be aware of any easements that they would be on. Now, well, and that's where we concluded it. So,
Well, should I present on what we actually talked about at the subcommittee meeting?
Yes.
Or, okay.
sure, go ahead.
So I don't know if we had notes from that, but it didn't look like we have anything in the agenda packet item. But I think ultimately what we were sort of trying to wrestle with is what type of things would be sort of considered acceptable in a side yard. I think we talked about one thing is just that, you know, we don't want to control what people are doing in their yards. And where we do want to control it is, I guess, when it becomes like another building or some type of structure that's looming and large. So we kind of started the discussion on the context of like playhouses, because that's what had provoked a lot of this discussion, with the idea that you want to be able to build, like, interestingly enough, by the way, treehouse, not regulated. So if you have a tree, you put a house up there, it's not on the ground, permittable. Or yeah, it's like a unique little outlier there. So you could have a looming treehouse up there. Something to keep in mind. But as it relates to something that would be on the ground, you should be able to build like a kid fort, you know? Get out there with your kids, or let the kids do it themselves. Or if you wanted to buy something from like Costco or a Walmart, like a kit, and build it. So we kind of looked at what the height was on that, which I think we arrived at, it was about, the only reason why we ended up with this 12 to 14 was because most of the kits we were like looking at, just browsing Walmart, Costco, things like that, end up in that kind of height. And so we thought, okay, well, you want it to be that or less so that somebody can build something like that with their kids. And then we talked about other structures, and for the most part, we're like, yeah, it doesn't really bother us if you've got tool sheds and things like that, all that would be below. So that you could have, you know, a tool shed. Where you ran into some interesting issues is, I was like, haven't we talked about this? But that's accessory dwellings as opposed to accessory buildings or accessory structures. So there's some complication wrapped around the definition of structures and buildings. And it basically, should be the catch-all for all of these other things that you might have in your yard. Like, apparently retaining walls are could be defined as structures according to building code. Was that right? Building code. But not like our code. It shows up in like international building code, something or other, right? And I was like, well, there's lots of retaining walls that are in front yards and side yards. So retaining walls, pads for AC. I think this may be where you differ. So we should dialogue about it. But we ultimately came out of, you know, if you've got any of these other things, as long as you're below height, it's not bothering your neighbor that much. People should be able to use their yards, have a little tool shed out there, have their AC pad, things like that. So I think that's where we ended up. I can't remember if did we end up with something drafted out of that? Not yet. I think we're trying to define what we were looking at. And go ahead, Michael, if you've got other things to add on that.
Yeah, that was pretty much my take on it too. We kind of just discussed the broad outlines of, you know, what was an accessory structure or two versus an accessory dwelling. So allowing one or two was another thing we went over, because right now it says one accessory dwelling, but we thought if it's like the accessory structure that you might be able to have more than one as well, like if you had two small sheds or something like that. that would be fine. And we discussed like a total square footage maybe of up to 250 square feet or something just shy of that, because at 250 square feet is where there's drainage review things that would start. So that's kind of where that came from.
Good point. Yeah, we did kind of talk about that because I think you brought up that the drainage requirements are such that if there's a pad, like a concrete pad over 250 square feet, then there would need to be like a drainage review plan. And so we're like, okay, well that kind of helps put a limit on this, so you wouldn't be building like some big monstrous with a pad play set. It kind of limits the scope of how big that could get. So
Well, thanks for getting together, and this is all good discussion, but I wonder if somebody could generate some sort of like a bulleted list or something that kind of defines, you know, what your set of recommend. I mean, I think I get a lot of it.
Yeah, I thought we were going to capture that, but that's on me. I'll take responsibility for that one. I should have put that down on a list.
I don't think this is an urgent thing, but if you had one for the next meeting, it'd be great.
Yeah, so we wanted to take that sort of thing back here for dialogue because I think chiefly around the height issue, and you know, credit to Jerry for putting some more thought into it and talking with Tom and getting some more input. But the reason where we were at with that number, and I think I don't know if we ended up at saying like it was 14 or we kind of, it was a squishy 14 though. We were all like, 14, and then I think you pointed out that maybe that wouldn't have affected that one tree house or playhouse.
12 to 14.
Yeah.
In brackets, so that way it could come for
So general idea was we want to let people build these things with their kids and not be too restrictive, but we're also like, well, it shouldn't be like a 25-foot tall, like, you know,
Well,
Barbie's dream house.
yeah, we have empathy for people that just want to have something for their kid. But then when you step back and look at the overall effect of letting all the accessory buildings that are possible into the yard, and it's the only yard left now, the character and how much is taken over, you've changed. We're not a cedar thicket anymore. We're building out to the building line and then putting buildings in the setbacks. So that should be carefully considered, how much and where it's gonna go and what you end up with. That gave me some reservations.
If you would you take the additional step of not only just creating a list or the things that you would say, and then passing it among the other two of you to review and make sure that everybody's kind of on board before you bring it this way? Is that fair?
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. It sounds like we may not end up with agreement if like, but what I could do is put down the discussion points of what we talked about, and then we'll bring it back, and then, you know, there may be like, it just be the jumping off point for more dialogue.
If there exactly.
Yeah.
If there are points of disagreement, then maybe we can hash some of that out here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
All right.
I didn't quite get the memo that we had to have a consensus.
I don't think anybody's saying we do, Jerry. We're
Okay,
just trying to capture something to talk about at the next
yeah,
one.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is totally good.
I think one thing to think about too, this probably is slightly different than the other building code stuff we're doing. A lot of times this is actually the homeowner that's putting these things out there, because the builder's not going to build a playhouse for the kids. Usually they're not going to build a shed.
Maybe.
But the AC could be.
One day.
The AC, those kind of things
Right,
they may do.
and
But-
on the AC, I changed my mind on whether it should be allowed in the setback area. Since it is a permanent, it's not a structure, but it's a permanent thing that reduces that side yard. It's about 3 foot square, and it's gotta be a foot away from the wall. So you end up with a 6 foot distance to the fence.
Okay.
And they're noisy, yeah.
They're noisy, that's the big issue. is they're
Were y'all,
noisy.
was that part of this discussion, or was it
Yeah.
just accessory?
Well, it's
We-
setbacks in general on what you can go wrong putting things and allowing things in
It-
a
it
setback
is-
area.
So, to answer your question, in terms of the discussion we had in this subcommittee meeting, it was because that would be within the scope of other structures. Just
Oh, because of,
because of it,
we're defining a AC pad as a structure still.
yeah, anything really is a structure. Apparently under some definitions, but
But not a driveway.
Yeah, and then. the
But
other-
yeah, I don't know how that gets out. So what we talked about, and it sounds like Jerry's changed his mind on this. When we were dialoguing, the three of us, we were all like, yeah, like what's the? It's not like there's a visual impact with the AC pad or the pool equipment. I hear you that there's a volume aspect to it, so I think it makes sense for us to all talk about it some. But that's where we ended up. So we did talk about it.
I
Just,
mean,
just,
really,
go ahead, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I mean, a lot of the whole reason we have building codes is to prevent excessive noise or visual impairment to our neighbors, right? I mean, what we're trying to do is protect our neighbors. And that air conditioning and pool equipment that's running constantly in the summer, I mean, you can't go outside and enjoy the neighbors cannot go outside and enjoy their yards. I mean, you can't. There's too much noise, especially pool equipment. Well, both of them in Texas. They're loud. They're very loud.
Query whether it'd be a meaningful difference if it was at 10 feet versus at 4 feet or 6 feet. I wonder if there'd be a significant difference with that.
Oh, by
So
the,
you're
by
talking
the
about
square.
are you talking about
It-
the playhouses?
I'm talking about from a noise standpoint.
It's
yeah.
exponentially. Yeah.
My neighbor, our neighbor, Catherine too, their pool equipment is in the back almost to the rear fence, and
It's grandfathered.
I sure wish it was in the side setback.
Well,
Yeah.
I think my gut is that 80% or more of the AC units in Rollingwood and across the nation are in side yards. That is the preeminent location for an AC pad.
Yeah, but.
You will
that-
not
that
find a
may
more
be-
predominant
Yeah,
area for
yeah,
them.
that may be true, but, you know, we're here in Rollingwood, I think, and we build them, when you're building new, out to the building line, you know where they're gonna go beforehand, so you can pre-plan it.
But
And
where
you're,
else do you
in
put it?
other
On the
words,
backyard?
you're rewarding people that just go out to the building
Front yard?
lines.
Backyard?
It's
Side
not
yard?
that
Put it
hard,
on the side, just not,
yeah.
Could be another projection on the side.
But
of the house.
not
Window unit.
not
I think where
closer
you
than
put
10
it is in the
feet to
buildable
the
area.
property line.
Just the
I
amount of
mean,
AC,
I
right,
built
by
a
shelf
house
or
on
whatever.
both sides of my house,
Same.
and it's in the buildable area, and I still have 10 feet on one side and 15 feet on the other, but my AC units are within my buildable area.
Same with mine.
So is mine. But
Well,
on
I
both
think it
houses.
would be, it's
Mine's
going to
separate
benefit
now.
from some good discussion. So my suggestion would be that we table this for the next meeting. I'll
Okay.
come back with bullet points and we can sort of zero in on where we want to be.
I-
Does that sound good?
I agree with that, and two, we were discussing air conditioning and generators and so on, and the recommendation that came from CRCRC on these things last meeting. I wanted to get it on the agenda this meeting, but I got to it too late, so I couldn't put it on. So it's actually on the agenda for next meeting already,
Oh.
and it goes in line with the same discussion. So
Okay.
I agree.
Generators is a good point. I don't think we thought about that. It's a
Uh,
little bit different from an AC unit or something.
A little louder too.
But,
That's what I meant by a little different. Yeah.
yeah, but only go about once a week.
All
10
right.
minutes once a week, 10
Thank
minutes
you.
once a week.
Very good, very good. Thank you. It sounds like you made good progress. I look
Okay,
forward
can we put
to,
regulations
I look
in
forward to
these
seeing
floors?
what you bring us
How long you can-
next month. Let's
These
see.
floors drive me nuts.
Moving along to regular agenda item number 7, discussion and possible action on a recommendation from CRCRC regarding drainage, impervious cover, and floor area ratio. Hopefully you've had a chance to read through this. This ought to be quick. The subcommittee that was looking at these 3 items had pretty much determined that, one, the survey did not support any or much action around these 3 things, and 2, that within the CRCRC, there was not the expertise to really deal with them effectively. were as best as they should be. Also pointing out that with the CRCRC having 2 architects in their group, they're able to do more in some areas, less in others. We just don't have the expertise on board. But this recommendation includes the possibility of doing a deeper dive into drainage and impervious cover, maybe by some other subgroup, which could be drafted from the Rolling Wood citizenry like y'all are, that might have the expertise in these areas. It's harmless. I ask you to just look at it, and I think we can at least endorse the recommendation.
Yeah, his conclusion is clearly written and pretty much says, we're not in position professionally to make a recommendation.
I'm inviting comment here. Okay, well then I am, this is not an actionable item really, but I would, because it is a recommendation or at least a set of suggestions that comes from the CRCRC, I would like to motion at least endorsement from this group, the recognition that it's there, and you could call it lack of disagreement with what's being said.
I'm not sure I know what that means.
Well, a stamp of approval?
I think like any other, recommendation CRCRC made, even if it's that we don't believe we should make a recommendation on this, I think it coming through P&Z, getting somewhat of an approval, and then going to council to kind of follow that same process as the rest of the recommendations makes total sense. I mean, it doesn't have to be we approve this, but I kind of like how you said it's just, we're kind of passing it on to council,
We didn't forget these items.
Right.
Yeah.
They're not hanging out there.
They're here.
They were asked to address it.
We considered, we did what we thought we could do. Here's a suggestion that you might want to take up. We support this.
And
So,
why? I guess what's the why?
So what I gathered from it was that the survey responses didn't seem to support that there was interest in pursuing these things, right? That's my
actually,
takeaway on FAR and impervious cover was we had survey questions on this issue, and the majority were not in favor of introducing those additional restrictions, and the CRCRC's felt that we were achieving what we want by height restrictions and other things we're pursuing. And so these things, because the surveys say no, and because we're doing other things, we don't need to do anything.
Well, almost right.
Okay.
In the area of FAR, it was actually almost a 50-50 vote. Or I shouldn't say survey. Survey responses were pretty much 50-50. But given what we've done with tenting, building height, we thought FAR was not really the tool that we needed for this.
Mm-hmm.
And we decided to take it off the table. We're not going to do that. Looked like the kind of thing that would just do nothing but cause trouble for us, really.
Because of the difficulty and lack of expertise.
Well, FAR is a little different, but with regard to drainage and impervious cover, yes.
So I guess I'm not opposed to the idea that I see the rationale and everything that CRCRC did on this issue. I'm like, yeah, it makes sense. The only part that I'm not sure about is this section at the end where it's like, we think there should be another community-driven approach to developing a set of recommendations. Like, is that the CRCRC? Is that the next version of the committee? It's just a little joke.
That was the recommendation that came from CRCRC.
Yeah, I mean, that part I don't know if I necessarily feel like makes sense to me. And it's only because I think we've had people look at this and go, we did a survey, we looked at it, we think we're gonna achieve what we need to achieve, so we don't need to go after these things. And I think I get that, and that makes sense. I think recommending that we put together another committee to look at it more seems to be counter to the idea that we looked at it and it's okay. I think the caveat that you're making makes sense with, well, we didn't have the design professionals and stuff like that that might be able to make something. But I guess where my head's at on this is, I like the idea of let's see if we can achieve what we're trying to achieve with these restrictions we're going after. Because I think we're getting really close to a workable height restriction that I think is going to carry most of the water on getting us where we need to get, you know? And I think you guys, you know, point that out here, and I just would say, I don't know that I would go back and recommend to City Council, we also need another committee. A little bit of what I talked with Tom about today, Tom Farrell about today too, was he was like, yeah, you know, to some extent the CRCRC, like, y'all should be doing some of this stuff with planning and zoning. He's like, you shouldn't be like trying to also then push off things to, and so I did feel a little bit guilty, like we had created this entire entity that was also like doing what we should be doing to some extent, and so I'm feeling a little bit guilty on that as well. So I'm like just sensitive to it. Maybe it's because of the recency bias of having just talked with Mr. Farrell about it, but that was also part of it. So
I think we have a speaker.
Sarah Hudson, 2805 Brockway. The concern is that while impervious cover and other means of addressing runoff were not specifically requested, or maybe did not get as much positive response in the survey, the biggest concern on every survey we've done in the city of Rollingwood is drainage. And so, I mean, there is great concern about the drainage issues that we have in the city. So they may not have said, oh, we don't want impervious cover restrictions or whatever else, but they want us to do something about the drainage. And the first draft of this proposal that the CRCRC put together said that the things that are being done for drainage in the city have addressed all the issues, and so nothing else needs to be done. And that is absolutely not true. The drainage study that we had done has $17 million worth of projects in there, and we are spending right now $2 million. So there's a lot more that needs to happen to address our drainage issues, and nothing that the CRCRC has done has addressed limiting runoff. So just want to make sure that you understand that has not been addressed by anything that CRCRC has done, and the City Council has not addressed all of that either, because we don't have $17 million to spend on all these projects. And that's just to address the runoff that we have identified already. So,
Yeah.
you know.
I would ask that piece, that last paragraph, be supported by this group, because it opens the door for the possibility. I don't know, it's really going to ultimately be City Council's call as to whether or not something needs to be done with regard to drainage more than has been done, or any of that. But without but having the CRCRC and P&Z at least, you know, tentatively weigh in on it, does at least provide the opportunity for consideration. And it may not go any further than that. Is that fair?
You're saying if it didn't have this language in it, the city can never review drainage again?
No, I think what it is, it's
With
called
fallout.
attention to it, Tony. That's it. Nothing more than that. Sure, it could be done. In fact, other studies have been done, but no, maybe the right amount of attention isn't being placed on those studies, and this is maybe a wake-up call to do that.
So I guess my question is, like, we have a drainage ordinance that is, and I think in spirit, is supposed to limit runoff to a 20% max impervious cover condition or no more than existing? Is that, Sarah, you may know this better than I do, but
It's not an ordinance, that's state law.
but we have to comply with state law, right? I mean, that's TCEQ. And we adopted the TCEQ ordinance for Rolling Wood.
State water code says that you cannot increase the rate or direction of flow of water off of your property.
Right.
But that's individual properties. So if every individual property has the same volume of, or same rate of runoff, but they have more runoff, it discharges over a greater amount of time, and then the volume at the bottom of the hill is the rate at the bottom of the hill is much higher, because you have longer duration for every discharge.
So, okay. Thank you. It's a great explanation. So, I guess, obviously, reducing overall impervious cover would potentially reduce that some, right? I mean, you still have detention ponds, still releasing water at whatever that maximum condition is. So, I mean, it would be a minimal change to the global drainage for the neighborhood if you reduced impervious cover, given that we have relatively restrictive TCEQ requirements.
The TCQ requirements are really very limited.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
okay. So I guess my experience has been that we've had, and it kind of goes to, I don't know if this is the right time to bring it up, but it goes to like Catherine's issue with this excavation. Apparently, I'm just taking at face value what you said, that was approved where it shouldn't have been, and I've seen our engineers approve drainage plans that were improperly done. So, I think from my perspective, I don't think we're enforcing the ordinances that we have very well. And so how can we, I think that's an easy place to start, is to how do we improve that review process and or the inspection process so that at least we're complying with what we have right now, because that's not even happening.
Well, that's the next agenda item.
If those of you who've just spoken with Tom recently, maybe he filled you in on this other part of his opinion on this, and that is that nobody, since the drainage ordinance was passed, some years ago, it's 2016, I think, nobody's gone back to take a look to see whether or not the money that is being spent by builders or developers on drainage mitigation issue, things, whether that money was well spent in doing what it was supposed to do, or would that money have maybe been better spent on a larger, more comprehensive project that goes across all of Rolling Wood and takes care of drainage once and for all. Nobody's asking that question, and that's what I think this is trying to say, without saying it exactly. But I think no one's looking at it. But all builders are still required. All builders are still required to do a full drainage study and all that, and then to come into compliance, spend what could be a whole lot of money to build some sort of drainage mitigation system for possible good or maybe not.
Wasn't there like I thought the city engaged some. Didn't the city engage some engineers at some point to do a drainage study?
$17 million project.
Yeah.
When was that study done?
It's 5 years old now.
5.
Maybe 10 years.
Yeah.
Did it weigh in on I guess it didn't weigh in on the effectiveness of what was being done on individual properties?
It recommended impervious cover limits.
What I was asking is, did it weigh in on whether the drainage manual was doing was having any positive or negative or no impact? Did it weigh in on that at all?
I don't think so.
With the drainage, what the drainage study did was look at the flows of water, stormwater through Rolling Wood,
and what it would take to manage those flows. It did not consider any additions to those flows based on house size or lack of impervious cover limits, other than to say impervious cover limits would result in limiting the additional flow that larger houses replacing smaller houses will bring to Rolandwood, and recommended that be studied, but it didn't comment on the current drainage ordinance, because that ordinance doesn't regulate volume of water.
I guess I would say, you know, Dave, you mentioned at one point that part of this is to sort of shine a light on this. This needs
Yeah.
attention.
Yeah.
But it's buried in the back of a,
Bless you.
you know, discussion about FAR, et cetera, and a report from CRCRC. Why don't we have a whole discussion point and, you know, something on our agenda to tackle it? It seems like it would shine more of a light.
Yeah, I mean, we're empowered to, well, I think is drainage within the scope of the zoning ordinances that we are meant to address?
Not quite. Well, you know, our drainage section is not in our zoning code, but I don't think you're limited specifically to that, but.
It's planning and zoning.
Yeah, planning, so.
So, like, we should add this as an agenda item and work on it here. No?
Could be. Could be. Again, this was, it looks like it's working already. This was to shine a light on it, okay? And I believe, and I think some others also believe, that we've got a lot of information available to us, including this drainage study that was done and so on, that maybe hasn't gotten a citizens group look or a deep look into. There are other things that are going on around here that I think that people just, you know, we spend an awful lot of time doing building height. We're still on it.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it's the citizens talking about this thing. And whenever we finally get to an answer, it's going to be, well, we ought to feel pretty good about it because at least it came from us. And it wasn't some consultant. Right now, we don't have a similar effort going on with regard to drainage, which is clearly an important thing here, given our topography. And that's what this recommendation asks for, is just essentially permission to consider bringing a citizens group together to take a deep look into this and say, are we doing the right things? Are we doing enough things? Maybe we are. Maybe, you know, but who knows? And nobody's asking the question. Now, and I'm sure if the step were to say yes, we ought to do it, I think it'll come to this committee again anyway.
Your concern was the establishment of another committee.
So this doesn't recommend that committee is established. It says it should suggest to the city council that if it desires a deeper dive, I mean, obviously, the city council can do whatever it desires.
That's right.
Let's just get it
I
done.
don't know, it's just,
It still puts it
It's
in
all
front.
feels kinda
It
weird.
still puts them in front of them, Tony. Gives us a start.
just
I'd
feels
like to
kinda
see it
weird.
happen. Okay.
You'd like to see that happen?
Yes, I would.
I feel like we should talk about that and send something to city council saying we recommend that you do this,
As a
as
matter of
opposed to
fact,
burying
yes.
this little thing
As
in
a
the back
matter,
of this
as a matter
document.
of fact, yes. She might be very close.
Do we have time to add something about drainage to the January 8th agenda? Should we do that?
Yeah, it's January 8th is filling up, isn't it? But, you know, this problem isn't going to get solved in the next month. I think this is way bigger, actually, than building height. So, but it is something that we should, if that is the desire of this group, to consider this. I guess what I would ask is your help in putting together what are the things that we would consider. What would it be? What is your idea as to what it is that needs to be discussed by this group?
So, are you saying you would prefer to wait until, and put it on the February agenda?
I would prefer to get this thing passed tonight. That's my preference is that, just for CRC, for P and Z to say, yes, that's not a bad idea. It doesn't force anything to happen. All it does is it's an endorsement.
I mean, it's a
The
weird
lead was
thing.
buried. Yeah.
I'm happy to like recommend things to council, like we proposed that we do the following, like what we just did on item 4. Sorry, item 5. This just seems weird, so I guess I'm disinclined. But I'm happy to address the issue itself, which I think makes sense, and I think it's great that you've pointed it out, and we should attack it. I don't think, city council can obviously, you guys get to do whatever you want, which is great, and so if they want to create a separate, well, kind of, I mean, more than what we have power to do, right? We just recommend up to y'all. If they think it makes sense to do a separate committee, like a CRCRC type thing, then, they're here and they know that and they can do it if they want to. I think we could do it, or I think we can at least do some groundwork on this and start thinking through it. Maybe it's with a subcommittee help, but, I'd add it to the agenda item and see what we can get done.
You're saying that you don't feel comfortable bringing this forward, but it sounds to me like the content, the gist of what you just said is in support of the idea. It's what it sounded like. I mean,
I don't know.
I'll say that
I mean,
to
I
me,
think-
the
I think-
presentation of this felt very weird, and the
I think
discussion
for-
felt very weird to me.
I think for me, it's like a little PTSD around where we're at on building height, and we did all this work at CRCRC that, comes here, and then it feels like, I kind of feel bad that we've taken away from some of the effort that went into it, and perhaps that's because of us not maybe doing some work beforehand and being able to provide more input. So I kind of think this may end up in the same way. Like, can we spend a little bit of time on it here? If we decide we need a
Okay.
committee for it, then maybe we need a committee, but at
Okay.
least we can, talk about what at least this body is open to and looking to accomplish, and then send a little bit more of a specific recommendation up if we
Okay.
think we need that
so
committee, so to
So
speak.
am I hearing you say you'd prefer to table this and come back to it with some more discussion?
Sure, I
is
think
that
that'd
right?
be great.
Is that
I think
right?
that'd be great, and maybe if we had more information around, that maybe
Yeah.
we need to study that plan first.
Does this
Yeah, the thing
require
that always-
action?
I'm
I just
sorry?
don't understand. Does this
If you're
require
wanting
action?
to do a motion that's less than a recommendation, you could do a motion to authorize submission of the report, or you could table it. And then this planning and zoning body could continue its own work and make recommendations in the future as it desires.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a question. That's essentially what my question was. It's a procedural question. It sounds like if we don't push it onto council, we're kind of like denying them the access to this report, which I don't think is productive. I think that, we don't necessarily agree with it, but we didn't write it. It's not our report. And all we're saying is that we reviewed it and pass it on.
That's an interesting distinction to me, is
I thought he was
submit the
asking-
report as opposed to endorse the report, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he was asking that we endorse it. That was the thing that I was like, well,
Oh, okay.
so
All right, don't endorse it. But, yeah, I mean.
I had heard a meeting before where some of this report was there, and I thought it was just, there was a requirement for CRCRC to close the book, so to speak, and present a report to P&Z.
Yeah.
And so this is summarizing why we didn't tackle FAR
Kind of
and all
it,
this
yeah.
stuff. But then it kind of, it's been added since I last saw this, now we want it to be not just a memorialization of the how and why and all that, but an potential creation or raised the idea of creating another similar subcommittee. To me, those two things seem like they should be better handled separately.
Okay.
But I'm happy to submit the report.
Okay.
I just don't necessarily, I don't want to get in the way. I don't want to.
All right.
I mean, why can't we just say we're submitting the report with our own, hesitation in endorsing the creation of another CRCRC-like community-driven approach?
Without further discussion.
Right, without further discussion.
Jeannie,
That's it.
that sounds like a motion to me.
So moved.
Yeah, that's fine. That sounds fine. Was that a motion? Did you catch that?
I know that Jeannie made it, and I will look back at the recording.
Good.
I will second that.
Okay.
Assuming it was official
Okay.
enough.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I guess if can we clarify what what are we voting on? It's sending the report to council without us recommending one way or the other whether we endorse it. Is that fair?
I think
And-
it was actually
and for
specific to
further
the,
discussion.
I think it was specific to the Citizens Committee piece.
Right, that's the,
I think it was specific to that.
specific to that,
And for further discussion at
planning and zoning.
planning and zoning. Which I think
Right.
is what you wanted.
Penny,
That
yes.
all makes sense.
Another
Yeah.
important piece, yes.
Just wanted to make
Can
sure.
you telegraph?
So
that
we-
for
Yeah, I
us?
think
So
this
we-
may be a great
Just
idea. I'm not
tell me
ready
that.
to
Is that good?
say, let's go form a committee
Generally.
at this point. Yeah.
Okay, cool enough. Cool enough. All right. Further discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes carry. All right. Look at us. Moving along. Agenda item number 8, discussion and possible action on recommendation from CRCRC regarding code enforcement. This is not too different. Here's the, when we created the CRCRC, there was a list of things that we were supposed to address, or we had intended to address, and code enforcement was actually one of those things. And we had actually put the initial draft of the survey actually had a question in there about, whether or not we should be doing more with code enforcement or doing something. I don't know. I can't remember what the question was, but it was struck that the group decided that really that is outside of outside of CRCRC's bailiwick, that we're talking about code, period, code changes, those kinds of things, not enforcement. That's really a staff job. And so the question was taken away. But the word enforcement comes up in the survey, free form, just in the comments, quite a bit, by quite a few people. And we just thought, well, we don't want to ignore that. Nobody else is going to go back here and look at all these surveys and see what was said. And this is one of the things you could see it. Is that people are saying, well, is the enforcement really being done? Are we doing enough? So we decided that what we would suggest is that based on what we're hearing in the survey, that staff take an inward look. Do they have enough staffing? Do they have what's required in order to do the enforcement the way the laws, our ordinances are written? And 2, and this really kind of came out of the tree piece, really, was to the extent that we can impress or impose the most severe penalties for law breaking or people breaking the ordinances. Can we do that? We recommend that. Make the penalties as severe as possible. And it's just that kind of a blanket statement. And we can treat this the same way we just did the last thing. It's a thing that, you can consider. If you felt like you wanted to endorse it, I think that would be fine. Otherwise, if you want to just pass it along to City Council that this is what the CRCRC says, and that's fine with no additional.
I don't have any problem enforcing our existing code. I have no problem endorsing that.
I would make one change. It says review current staffing levels and processes, and I would add, expand the definition of processes to include outside consultants who are paid by the city to, like, authorize things like, different building code, the implementation of the codes. So just expand current staffing to include all, paid consultants who are instrumental in the enforcement of the code.
I think that's a good improvement.
Yeah, I might also add along the same lines as just, I don't know, and maybe you can provide some clarity, Nikki, but like the quality of the review that we're getting and who pays for that, and making sure that the reviews are done well, and that they're thorough. Maybe even look into a different consultant. We've had as many. I mean, I think I only see the mistakes. I mean, there might be 100 good ones for every 3 bad. I don't know, but it just seems like the rules we have are not being effectively reviewed, and or the inspection process is also has been, things get missed. Seen many examples of that. So I'd love for council to take that up and be more vigorous with however that happens, whether it's higher permit fees, different consultant, whatever it is.
Yeah, Mike, I don't remember if it was in a one-on-one meeting with you or in here, but you've mentioned that our permit fees are not particularly high compared to other places, and could we generate money to whatever we decide, hire better consultants, pay them more, whatever it is that would help?
Sure.
Is that
Yeah. I
something
mean,
that's
maybe there's a trade-off. Like, can the permit fees be higher and the reviews be faster and better? Like, everyone wins, right? The homeowner wins. They're getting it back faster. Most people are probably willing to pay for that. And if we can also have it be a better review process, then I think any of those ideas are good.
So let me ask, are you asking to add to this recommendation and say this is now a joint recommendation or a joint set of suggestions from CRCRC and P&Z? Because it's kind of got dual authorship now, and in a sense? Would you go with that? I mean, I actually prefer that. I like it.
Sure. I'm open if necessary. I think with Janie's suggestions also.
Okay.
Yeah.
May I bring it back? May I bring it back with those, what I think I heard, next meeting, and we'll just say, did that cover it? And then we move it along. Is that all right?
Sure. Is it too much to ask to involve staff in what would be helpful for them to feel like they're got the tools they need to, enforce the ordinances that we have?
That's a good
And
point.
add to this however you see fit, so that we can make sure that we support you guys appropriately?
Be good to have your input on it.
Well, I think that's what the recommendation says, is let kind of council review current staffing. I mean, I think that.
That's how I understood
Yeah.
that bullet
It
point,
already
yeah.
encompasses that in my mind.
Yeah.
It already opens the door to that conversation, but I like where you're going with it.
Well, I'm not
it's
saying
good.
that's not necessarily in regard to staffing levels, but just other ideas that you guys might have that aren't necessarily staffing levels, but mechanisms to make your job easier. I don't know that it's the same thing as staffing levels in my mind, but
Mr. Chair, I apologize. I have to leave to grab a work call that starts in
Yeah,
6 minutes, but I am in favor of this,
Okay,
as discussed. So
thank you.
if you needed my vote beforehand,
All right.
you got it.
I'll tell you what, I'm just gonna motion that, you allow me to take this. I will involve a discussion with staff, but take what we've got, I'll listen to the tape myself, add to it what I think we talked about, with the idea that it would be then a joint authored, I don't know if you call it recommendation, but, okay? And then I'll bring it back next time, we can vote on it.
Okay. Does that mean
So
we're
motion.
tabling it, or do you need a motion to take that back and do,
I
However
think
you
I'll
want
call that, if you wanna call that a motion, it is, that I motion that we table it for further
Well, we can just table it and you can do that work,
improvement.
right?
Yeah.
you
Okay.
know,
Okay.
To include P and Z comments.
sounds great. Thank you
Okay.
for doing that, Dave.
All right?
Yep.
All right, there's a motion,
Second.
okay, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, all opposed? Ayes carried.
Apologies,
Moving
Dave.
along,
Thank
all
you.
right. Thank you, Mr. Nash.
I take back my resume if
Thank
you
you,
have
guys.
work calls
Okay.
right now.
Yeah.
I don't want that job.
Do you ever sleep?
Okay,
Japanese clients.
all right. Agenda item number 9 is what we talked a little bit about before, discussion and possible action on recommendations on remaining CRCRC items. As far as the CRCRC is concerned, there are no more items. But we needed, in our last meeting, we decided we probably needed to talk with you guys and ask you, is there anything else you want us to do before we close things down?
I guess the only
we-
question would be that last one. Do you have to involve them since it's a CRCRC recommendation?
I'll take
Yeah.
that to them
Yeah.
next week, okay? But, they won't have it. We, P and Z, are allowed to do that regardless, without regard to CRCRC's desires. We can do that. But I will report to them that this is happening, okay? So, getting back to the subject here, is there, we've been going for over a year and a half now, and we've now lost 2 members, and we're pretty much ready to be finished as much as we can be. We'd like to be done. So, but if there's something else that is pressing, or you felt that we didn't cover properly or whatever, we're around. It's been recommended by City Council that that we continue to be a committee as long as the things that are being considered for public review and then possible codification, possible, ordinance changes, that we be in place for that, so we can ask questions and so on, answer questions. So we're not going away, but we are trying to wind down at least our actions, our activities.
I personally don't have any specific new things to add, and I've said it before, I'll say it again. We really appreciate all the extensive effort and time, and I think that wherever we land on all this, it will be much better and much greater impact than it could have ever possibly been had that commission not been formed and done such a great job. So
Thanks for that. Okay, I don't think there's any motion here, so if there's nothing else to say about it, we're still gonna be around. If something occurs to you, I guess, you can bring it up, but I'll take that as, looks like we've probably done everything that you expected us to do. Okay, and our final thing here, and this came up in our last meeting, so I added it to the agenda, discussion and possible, item number 10, discussion and possible action on a recommendation for fence construction materials. We were talking about that, whenever we were getting into the fence height stuff, and we couldn't talk about construction materials because it wasn't included. Remember? So
when somebody wanted to talk about walls, was that right?
that's right. We wanted to talk about that. Now, certainly this isn't urgent. So if you're tired,
We're gonna come back to the fence height issue, right?
well, it's going to go.
I think
well,
that's
fence,
on our
no,
public
fence
hearing,
height,
right?
we're done with.
We're done with that.
Yeah, we're done.
Well,
We passed it
we're not
along.
done because we got a public hearing.
Yeah, it's going to public.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, we
So
we've
if we
done our
wanted to deal
piece.
with materials in conjunction with height, did that ship sail, or can we,
It's too
when
late.
it comes back, can we just talk
It's-
about
no,
it at the
it's-
same
it's-
time?
no, I don't think we can add to it.
Okay.
I can't remember the context. Was it just people just wanted to talk about it when we couldn't talk about it? Or did somebody have a specific thing they
Well,
wanted to bring up?
it kind of got mixed in with the discussion, and we decided we really couldn't talk about it. And I said, I promised that I'll bring this back in the next meeting so that we can. So if there is, interest in putting something in the code that has to do with Friends Construction materials, we can talk about it.
Because I don't think we have any restriction right now.
We do
Other
not.
than front yard, and we can't have chain link fences.
That's
Is
right.
chain link not allowed?
Yeah.
That is the only
No.
fence material reference restriction that we have?
Barbed wire.
Razor wire.
Concertina.
I don't know, we can table it, it's 9 o'clock, I don't know if it's.
We
urgent,
can, yeah, I know there's no urgency or.
Yeah, I haven't seen
The
anything.
particular thing, and I'm
in
happy
there
to-
that's
You had a
given me
concern
pause,
about
but.
But,
the
Well,
concrete block. I mean,
but-
and I understand why.
Yeah, I mean, I
Oh.
think there's a few materials that are undesirable that would be
Yeah.
nice to deal with, but,
Self-selects pretty well too with the general neighborhood people wanting their fences to look
Okay.
good, but,
well,
most of the time.
yeah.
I can put this on the agenda for next time, and, and in the meantime, give it a think, and, and if it makes sense for us to take it up, then we will, and if we don't, well, that's okay too, I guess,
I mean, it also kind of goes along with retaining walls, the look of,
But- And those things, there's definitions around those.
right, but some of them are kind of ugly. So
They're
I
not
mean,
supposed to be. They're not supposed to be.
I know, but I mean, it's in the same vein. Okay.
All right, so, motion to table this item.
I'm
Second.
Motion to adjourn?
Pretty close, we're getting there, we're almost there. So,
So you moved, I second?
yeah, you go ahead, second. Okay,
Aye.
aye, good. All right, adjourn, motion to adjourn?
Second?
All right.
Aye.
Aye.